Chapter 677. The blade light charged in and a sharp energy exploded, blowing Jia Mingluo's head and soul into pieces. Leng Daiyu was stunned and knew that Jia Mingluo was already heavily injured and had lost his life force. She casually shook her hand and tossed the Night Demon Prince's corpse off the flying claw. She was at a loss and didn't know what to do. Continue to fight with Zhong Shou? However, Jia Mingluo was already dead, and even if they continued, he wouldn't be able to survive. However, if they gave up just like that, it wouldn't be appropriate. Zhong Shou kept his sword and retreated tens of thousands of feet away. He took a deep look at the plain-clothed young girl and nodded slightly. Goodbye. Although he still had some reluctance in his heart, he didn't hesitate to tear open the void and head back towards Seven Cloud Mountain. A moment later, he returned to the cloud world and stepped onto the peak of Seven Cloud Mountain. He saw that the battle situation was already settled. Out of 8 million night demons, half of them were dead and there were 1 million of them. Naturally, there were some grade 6 and grade 7 night demon experts who shook off the pursuit of the Gantian mountain cavalry. They snuck into the nearby forests and continued to head east. Zhong Shou didn't care much as the outcome was already decided. It was expected that some of them would escape. It would be best if he could chase them out of Huizhou Island. If he couldn't, then it was okay. The cloud world was huge, but there was no place for them to live. A few night demons wouldn't be a huge problem. The spiritual wave surged, and within a few years, there would be hundreds and thousands of grade 7 experts appearing in Huizhou. He didn't even need to purposely wipe them out, and these night demons would naturally disappear. At this moment, he had another more important thing to do: Dowling Vast Habitat. Zhong Shou clenched his fists. Cracking sounds could be heard as the energy around his body vibrated. Since the Dowling Palace head had prepared such a feast for him, then how could Zhong Shou not return the favor? Coincidentally, at this moment, Zhong Yuan led the 5,000 Blood Cloud cavalry over. He had just trampled over 1 million night demons and absorbed countless amounts of blood energy. It was the blood cloud that was swirling with an extremely powerful aura. Kong Yao seemed to know what he was thinking and said seriously, "The situation here has already been settled. If ruler wants to do anything, you don't have to worry. I am fine here. That Dowling Vast Habitat offended me first. If I don't fight back, people will look down on me." Zhong Shou looked at Kong Yao in astonishment, and immediately understood. With Kong Yao's intelligence, it wasn't hard for her to guess who ambushed her during the battle with Jia Mingluo. Thinking about it carefully, naturally one could guess that the elite cavalry hiding behind Seven Cloud Mountain 2,300 li away from the Seven Cloud Mountain, in a valley. Wuji was riding on a fire-stepping purple gold scale, waiting impatiently. At his level, he shouldn't have been so impatient and anxious. However, for some reason, he had been feeling uneasy since early in the morning. At this moment, behind him, a full 7,000 cavalry were standing quietly within the valley. They were all wearing purple extreme light armor with a yin-yang pattern on their chests. They held spears, and under them were Xian Flame golden scale beasts. These were the grade 6 Dao soldiers of Dowling Vast Habitat, the purple Qilin Flame Spear Cavalry. The aura of thousands of people was like one person. However, those golden scale beasts that inherited the bloodline of the Qilin might have sensed Wuji's uneasiness. They all felt weird, their hooves rising up and down, giving out loud noises. As time went on, Wuji's brow furrowed deeply. Ming Wei and the 7 true martial swordsmen were in charge of killing Zhong Shou. He led 7,000 purple Qilin Flame Spear Cavalry here to ambush the Blood Cloud Cavalry that had swept the cloud world undefeatable. At this moment, no matter if they succeeded or failed, there should have been news from Seven Cloud Mountain. However, until now, there was still no message talisman at all. It should have been a sure thing, but instead, it made him really nervous. Also, not far from here, there seemed to be a Dao soldier elite cavalry whose scale was no weaker than his. He tried to probe several times but still couldn't find out their foundations. Although they had already retreated 2 hours ago, they had already left. However, it also added some changes to the battle today. A moment later, a golden light finally landed from the sky. It made Wuji's brow furrow and joy flashed in his eyes. However, the moment the talisman landed in his hand, Wuji's face was green, then white, then green, and then green, constantly changing. A pent-up anger was in his chest, rumbling and not being able to be vented. The Mirage realm suppressed the enemy, the Night Demon army collapsed. Minghui fell, Jia Mingluo fled. The Xiantong and Lingming sect heads along with the 7 true martial swordsmen definitely survived. A long while later, Wuji spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. His tone was filled with rage. Minghui, you deserve to die for ruining our Taoist faction. If this person wasn't filled with hatred and went over him to speak, why would the palace head do such a thing? The moment he scolded out, Wuji's mood didn't turn for the better. His spiritual sense continued to flow in the talisman, and his eyes slowly turned cold. If one didn't kill the snake, one would be harmed instead. Moreover, this Zhong Shou wasn't a snake but a tiger. After this battle, not only did their strength not decrease, but their strength increased instead with this person's personality. Once he was free, how would he not take revenge? Suddenly, he thought about something. Wuji rode his horse forwards, riding the fire-stepping purple-golden Qilin out of the valley. Let's go. Let's go. If we don't, it will be too late. Those purple Qilin flame spear cavalry exchanged glances with one another. Although they didn't understand, they all urged their mounts. Following Wuji, they charged out of the valley. They followed the desolate stone path and galloped forward. In 2 hours they covered close to 1,500 miles. Wuji directly took the shortcut. Deep into the night, the entire cavalry force was 7,000 miles away. Zhong Shou ordered Zhonggang, Ren Tianxing, and the others to chase the people here to the west of Huizhou. This was why there was no one along the way. Along the way, one could only see some empty houses and buildings. At this moment, Wuji felt slightly more at ease. They had rushed all the way here, so they should be safe. Zhong Shou had cleared out the wilderness such that the night demons had no food to find. However, it also meant that his purple Qilin flame spear cavalry didn't have to worry about being exposed. Although the Blood Cloud cavalry was a grade 5 iron cavalry, it was said that they used the Blood Cloud secret technique to support the consumption of their mounts. However, they could travel tens of thousands of miles in a day and their speed was above that of the grade 6 Dao soldiers. However, no matter how fast the Blood Cloud cavalry was, it would be tough for them to catch up. However, they still didn't dare to relax and continued to gallop at full speed. When their mounts were tired, they would change to another one. Instinctively, they felt that it was best to get as far away from Seven Cloud Mountain and Zhong Shou as possible. If they passed another 2,000 miles, it would be a flat land. The terrain was vast and there wasn't any place they had to pass. At that time, they would spread out the 7,000 cavalry and flee in all directions. Even if they faced an accident, a large portion of them would be able to safely return to Dowling vast habitat. They went around the side of a stone city wall. When the entire purple Qilin flame spear cavalry stepped onto the wide stone path and was prepared to speed up, a figure suddenly appeared. Wuji's expression suddenly changed. Only to see a person appear in front of him, blocking in front of him. He held a sword in his hand and wore a white robe with golden patterns. He looked weak but was filled with a sharp heroic aura. A vast sword pressure spread through the air. That face was extremely familiar, causing Wuji's pupils to constrict. Zhong Shou. He was shocked and instinctively spread out his spiritual sense to search. However, he couldn't sense the Blood Cloud cavalry. He was slightly surprised but also at ease. Even if the Blood Cloud cavalry didn't have wings, they should have been able to chase up. On the contrary, the person in front of him with his grade 9 cultivation was able to chase up. Wuji also knew that he had a royal demon god shuttle in his hands. In other words, only Zhong Shou was blocking in front of him. Reining in his horse, Wuji stopped on the ancient path of the wilderness. The 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry and 20,000 Xian flame golden Qilin beasts all stopped at the same time. All of them held their purple spears and waited solemnly. 7,000 people worked together to go up against Zhong Shou's sword pressure. Their aura didn't give in at all, and they even had the strength to counter. Looking at the person in front of him, Wuji spat out a mouthful of turbid air. "Ruler is here to stop us from returning to the west?" Zhong Shou laughed when he heard this. If not to kill the purple Qilin flame spear cavalry of Dowling Vast Habitat, why would he come all the way here? He was too lazy to speak, just holding the nameless sword and standing there like a stone statue. His body was thin, but he was like a giant mountain that couldn't be crossed as he blocked the stone path. Xiari instantly came out from his sleeves and jumped onto his shoulder. Then, it looked curiously at the Xian flame golden Qilin beast. It sniffed and a weird expression appeared in its eyes. There was the scent of the same race, but what an inferior bloodline. Thus, it shook its head to show its disdain. Those 20,000 Qilin beasts all shrunk their bodies and started to move their hooves uneasily. Wuji didn't sense anything at all. His expression froze and then he sighed. Dowling Vast Habitat was in the wrong for everything that happened today. There is nothing I can say. No wonder the ruler would be angry for no reason. Unfortunately, my original intention was to get close to ruler. Even if Dowling Vast Habitat can't be friends with ruler, we can't be enemies. Who knew that it would end up like this? As he said this, Wuji paused. His tone was filled with sincerity. Is there really no way to turn things around? Are we really going to be enemies with the Taoist faction? Zhong Shou shook his head slightly. Before today, how would he be willing to do that? He had also personally asked Minghui about the latter sentence. Things had already reached such a stage. There was no point in saying anything more. The only thing he was curious about was why Dowling Vast Habitat would take such a huge risk to interfere in this battle despite being blamed by the Cloud World Sex. However, there was no need to ask such a question. After this matter, he would send people to investigate and naturally he would find out the truth. Looking coldly at Wuji, Zhong Shou's lips curled up. From today on, under my rule, all Dowling cultivators will die. All Taoist cultivators will be exterminated and killed without mercy. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qigyan. Chapter 678. From today on, all the cultivators under my rule will die. All the Taoist faction cultivators will be wiped out and killed without mercy. He was decisive, and this short sentence could be considered his reply to Wuji. He would fight to the death with this Taoist faction. Not only was Wuji's expression green, but the 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry were all furious. Their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets as they stared at Zhong Shou with red eyes. No one doubted whether or not Zhong Shou could do it. As the ruler of a country, he had millions of elite troops under his rule. Apart from having fewer high-grade experts under him, the rest were the top powers in the cloud world. Zhong Shou's martial path was invincible under the spirit realm in the cloud world. Even the true martial 7-point formation couldn't do anything to him, so one could see how strong he was. If he wanted to wipe out the Dowling Vast Habitat, no one would be able to stop him. Wuji's heart was beating rapidly. He only felt fear and anger. However, everything today was his own fault and he couldn't blame anyone else. However, it wasn't like there was no way to turn the situation around. Forcing himself to calm down, a trace of coldness appeared between Wuji's brows and eyes. Since the ruler insists, then there is nothing I can do. However, we aren't willing to sit here and wait for death. As he said that, Wuji's hand had already formed a sword seal. A bright sword suddenly came out of its sheath and flew around him. I don't know why the ruler came here alone. I only know that the ruler is too confident. Does the ruler really think that you can fight against 1,000 and stop our 7,000 cavalry? If the ruler dies here, then all your plans will be for naught. As long as this Zhong Shou died here, then even if Dowling Vast Habitat's plan didn't succeed, they would be able to retreat safely from the east of the cloud world. Zhong Shou smiled when he heard this. Fight against 1,000? Why not? He was too lazy to speak to this person. The nameless sword also gave out a clear buzz like it was replying. The sword aura that surged around Xiao Chen became increasingly sharp, and his killing intent soared into the clouds. Wu Ji only needed to look at Zhong Shou's expression to know his answer. After taking in a deep breath, the dark ruthlessness that had accumulated at the corner of his eyes for a long time could no longer be suppressed. He couldn't help but laugh secretly. This Zhong Shou had really lost his mind. He was insane. Resisting 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry by himself? Did he think that he was the reincarnation of Prince Xiang or Prince Ran? Invincible in the world? Forget it. He was so determined and confident. Today, he would personally destroy the Eastern Overlord. The fire-stepping purple-golden scale under him suddenly leaped forward, its hooves flying in the air. At the same time, Wu Ji took out a 3-feet-long purple spear. The flying sword protected his body, the spear pointed forwards, and the few protector beasts were like spiritual shields protecting him. His mount leaped forward, the 7,000 cavalry behind all rode their mounts and followed closely behind. Spear shadows shot forwards, instantly turning into millions of dots as they stabbed towards Zhong Shou, who was 10,000 feet away. The horse hooves galloped like an iron current, able to wipe out everything. A full 7,000 people's meridians were connected. A bright glow exploded out from Wu Ji's eyes. Today, even if it was a mountain, he would be able to crush it. Zhong Shou didn't care at all, squinting his eyes and laughing. The 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry charged over like a maniac wave, vast ocean-like spiritual sense pressed down. The sword pressure and sword intent that charged out around him didn't back off at all and wasn't destroyed. Only when Wu Ji's spear shadow was 100 feet away did his hand move. The sword shadow flashed, a silver light stabbed out like a waterfall and forced the purple spear shadow back. One origin in terms of the intricacies of the sword technique, Old Man Long Ying's 99 Long Ying sword was the most exquisite and profound. However, in terms of mastering it the most and being able to counter the enemy, undoubtedly it was still his one origin sword, merging hundreds of sword techniques and sword intents into one. He spent a large part of his life researching and perfecting this sword technique, which was why he was the most familiar with it. That 99 Long Ying sword also had a portion of its essence merged within, which was why within 100 feet, it was his unbreakable sword domain. Forcefully forcing back Wu Ji's purple spear, the sword shadow in Zhong Shou's hand exploded out. In an instant it turned into thousands of streaks, covering 100 feet in front of him, either using strength to fight strength or pulling him towards himself. Most of the time, he didn't even take half a step back as he went head-on. Within this 200 feet area, there was the sound of energy exploding. The spiritual light was eye-piercing, the entire space seemed like it was being ripped apart. The ground below was also collapsing. Many cavalry beast cries and roars sounded out 100 feet in front of Zhong Shou. Many Xian flame golden Qilin beasts couldn't take the pressure of the energy and fell down. Maybe they were afraid of the millions of sharp blades in front of them and weren't willing to move forwards. All of them started to get up. Numerous pieces of flesh and blood flew about, but none of them could get within 100 feet of Zhong Shou's body. The 7,000 cavalry were like a wave as they charged over, but it was like they had met a reef. The 100 cavalry at the front were unable to shake Zhong Shou. The entire cavalry force could only spread out to the sides. They couldn't get close to 100 feet. that seemingly unstoppable iron current was split into two. However, just at this moment, Zhong Shou's lips curled up once more. You want to pass by his side? How is that possible? One origin yang. Changing from defense to offense, millions of extremely sharp sword shadows charged towards the sides. All the purple Qilin flame spear cavalry that passed by the sides were either heavily injured or had their necks broken. In just a moment, this 100-feet area was covered in corpses. However, they didn't pile up like a mountain and affect one's vision. The ground collapsed, only the area where Zhong Shou was standing was perfectly fine. The hundreds of human and horse corpses were just enough to fill up the deep holes. The area where Zhong Shou was standing was a little higher, giving one a feeling like he was standing on top of millions of corpses. The 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry couldn't get close and couldn't go around from the side. The formation was instantly in chaos. In the end, they split into two directions, going in opposite directions and regrouping tens of thousands of feet away. Zhong Shou didn't chase, standing on the spot. Blood seeped out from the corner of his lips, but he didn't bother about it. Going head-on against 7,000 grade 6 Dao soldiers, if he wasn't injured, then that would be weird. He couldn't hide it. There was no need to hide it. Holding the nameless sword in his hand, he went all out to adjust the energy in his body. His soul power was okay, with the nameless sword absorbing these hundreds of grade 6 souls. The green flame in his soul ocean had pretty much reached its peak. The soul power that it provided actually made one feel like it was swelling up. In this battle, it would depend on whether Zhong Shou fell first or if the 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry were wiped out first. Wuji was 10,000 feet out. His expression was really ugly as he looked coldly at Zhong Shou. He was really 1 against 1,000. 7,000 iron cavalry charged, but they weren't able to shake him at all. At this moment, Zhong Shou was holding his long sword, expressionlessly standing on top of the corpses within 100 feet radius. His aura seemed really ethereal, but it was filled with an indescribable dominance and confidence, looking down on the thousands of grade 6 iron cavalry like they were nothing. Although he knew that Zhong Shou was definitely injured, he didn't know how light his injuries were. Before this, he totally gave up on his plan to kill the Gantian mountain monster king here. The 100-feet area was totally unbreakable and couldn't be smashed. Heavy sword shadows were like mountains and walls. His eyes wandered as he looked to the sides. This place wasn't blocked, but this place was really wide. If they spread out, they should be able to go around it. However, he seemed to have seen through his plan. Zhong Shou smiled, his hands forming a seal as he chanted. Then, the sword in his hand stabbed into the ground. Instantly, 32,000 feet of lightning wings spread out from his back. It covered 64,000 feet of land, drawing in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth within 100 miles. Countless crimson flames spread in all directions. Looking out, 300,000 feet of land turned into a red flame ocean. A green spiritual mirror also rose into the sky. Under the cover of the light, it immediately caused people to feel like they were hallucinating. At this moment, Zhong Shou grinned once more as he walked over. Wuji's heart sank once more. He knew that this was most probably the Lu family sky burning flame. Normal grade 9 spells wouldn't be able to cover such a huge area. Only the innate ability of one's bloodline could achieve this. He was also shocked at the strength of Zhong Shou's soul power to be able to support this 300,000 feet of flame ocean without feeling tired at all. He roughly knew what Zhong Shou was thinking. They wanted to spread out and flee, but they probably wouldn't be able to do so. Although this place was wide, it was the only path. It wasn't impossible to go around from the side, but it would take 4 to 5 hours. Thinking back to the blood cloud cavalry behind who knew when they would arrive, he felt a chill in his chest. His eyes once again focused on Zhong Shou. Thinking about it, this was the only way. He urged the fire-stepping purple-golden scale under him to charge forwards once more. Wuji's heart didn't waver at all. That thought of fleeing was totally wiped out. He totally understood that this Zhong Shou was the enemy of Dowling vast habitat. The more time passed, the harder it would be to deal with him. If he could kill Zhong Shou here today, then even if he and the 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry of Dowling vast habitat died here, it would be worth it. 6,400 spear energies swept about. Although there were few of them, their aura was really strong. They faintly gathered into one and charged over. Zhong Shou once again grabbed the nameless sword handle. His face was expressionless, but the seriousness in his eyes became thicker. This attack was even stronger than the previous one. Wuji was really prepared to die. The next clash was the key. Whether or not he could break the spine of this purple Qilin flame spear cavalry, whether or not he could wipe out their fighting spirit, all depended on this sword. Energy surged in his body. However, he didn't notice that Xiaori's pitiful and teary eyes were filled with rage. In its eyes, the situation today was different. It didn't care about those people, only focusing on those Xian flame golden Qilin beasts. Such low-grade Qilin blood actually dared to provoke the ruler. Once was okay, but now there was a second time. It raised its head slightly, its expression was really arrogant. Scales appeared all over its body. Chapter 679. Just as Wuji's spear shadow was once again 150 feet away, a full 6,400 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry galloped over. Xiaori suddenly lowered his body and hollered with a solemn expression. Flames ignited on its four hooves. Zhong Shou was stunned. Then, he saw that the thousands of Xian flame golden Qilin beasts, as well as Wuji's fire-stepping purple Qilin, were all panicking. Their footsteps were in a mess as they gave out panicked cries. The cavalry army that was originally orderly and gave off an aura instantly became chaotic. They were connected as one, like they were one person, but at this moment they all collapsed. The vast aura didn't exist at all. Zhong Shou's brow rose up. Moments later, he understood. He knew that this was caused by Xiaori's pure Qilin blood. He couldn't help but laugh out loud, shaking the wilderness. The purple Qilin flame spear cavalry swept the world in an arrogant manner. However, his little puppy was their nemesis. He blocked the enemy alone. His original intention was to go all out. Even if he was heavily injured, he had to last until the blood cloud cavalry arrived. He didn't expect that there would be such a surprise today. The purity of this fire Qilin's bloodline was above what he had expected. Without any hesitation, the sword in Zhong Shou's hand changed, giving up on defense and turning to attack. The dragon-like sword light slashed diagonally, piercing into Wuji's heavy spear shadows. It directly broke the flying sword and then flicked it up. Wuji's entire body was flicked up from the fire-stepping purple Qilin, slicing him into two in mid-air. The sword light exploded, numerous blade shadows pierced forwards, covering thousands of feet. Blood and flesh flew everywhere. Another 100 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry had their throats sliced. At this moment, Xiaori roared out once more, shaking 100 miles. On the plains, including the thousands of purple Qilin flame spear cavalry, 20,000 Xian flame golden Qilin beasts all trembled and knelt on the ground. No matter how their master chased them, they wouldn't move at all. The entire cavalry army lost their aura, all of them looking at one another in shock. Although Wuji's body was broken, he was still alive. Seeing such a scene, his pupils constricted. His gaze was fixed on the little puppy with 4 feet on fire beside Zhong Shou's shoulder. Qilin. Moreover, he was the noblest king among the Qilins. To be able to make 20,000 Xian flame golden Qilin beasts submit to him and order him around. No matter how pure his bloodline was, it was still impossible. Qilins were born by consuming qi. Only by absorbing the qi of the kings of the human world or beasts could they truly grow into the king of a race. However, the Qilin was one of the kings of the 10,000 beasts, so it was impossible for it to accompany the Qilin. As for the kings and emperors of the human world, they had millions of people under their command, gathering the hearts of countless people. Even the king's qi was difficult to be pure and flawless. It was even more impossible for these Qilins to reject the king's qi by eating it. Suddenly, Wuji thought of something and spat out another mouthful of blood. Dowling Vast Habitat also raised 200,000 Xian flame golden Qilin beasts. There were no less than 1,000,000 spirit mounts that were related to the Qilin. All beasts in the world were restricted by the bloodline of their ancestors. This was why the Dao soldiers of the various sects were all considered before they were built. For example, the silver scale-wind stepping beast that Song Shengdao's common people's mysterious dragon warriors used was a mix of various god-beast bloodlines. The combat strength of the mounts were slightly weaker, but when they faced the suppression of the god-beast, they weren't affected much. Tailing Sect's purple cloud sword cavalry used purple-winged lizards, descendants of the ancient giant lizard pseudo-dragon. They were pretty much wiped out by the dragon race. Even if there were some left, they weren't a problem. Their Taoist faction used Xian flame golden Qilin beasts, which were formed from various Qilin bloodlines. They predicted that there wouldn't be any more Qilin king blood in the world. Out of the grade 6 Dao soldiers of the various sects, they were the strongest. However, if Zhong Shou had this beast, this was a calamity, a huge calamity. The more he thought about it, the more shocked he was. Wuji's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Zhong Shou was lazy to bother about this person, looking into the distance. In the sky, a blood-red color was sweeping over from the horizon. Looking carefully, it was a cavalry army, close to 5,000 of them. The two at the front were both holding halberds. They were Zhong Yuan and Yin Yang. How quick! Zhong Shou was slightly shocked but also felt relaxed. To use one person to go up against 7,000 cavalry, such heavy pressure wasn't a joke. Just now, he missed his sword and he was in danger of dying. The arrival of these 5,000 blood cloud cavalry meant that the dust had settled. Looking forward at the thousands of purple Qilin flame spear cavalry who could only walk, Zhong Shou had an idea. People were the most unsatisfied and Zhong Shou was no exception. Originally, he was only planning to wipe out this purple Qilin flame spear cavalry. At this moment, he was thinking about how to take down all these 20,000 Xian flame golden Qilin beasts. With this group of close to grade 5 cavalry beasts, his second cavalry army that could be compared to grade 6 Dao soldiers could be built up. Ruo Shui. Following his soft call, the figure of a young girl appeared behind him out of thin air. She had been standing there, protecting Zhong Shou's back. However, the entire thousands of cavalry didn't notice her at all. Spread my orders across the entire territory. All the temples under Dowling Vast Habitat were wiped out. All cultivators above grade 2 will be killed. One word and the statues can be burned. Half a year later, there will be a sentence of 3 years for Taoist faction scriptures. All cultivators will be killed. This decree can spread to the world that from today onwards, only one of us can survive. Wuji felt like there were tens of thousands of arrows stabbing into his chest. His heart was dripping blood. Who knew whether or not Zhong Shou said this decree just for him to hear? However, he only felt his heart sink to the bottom. The moment this decree went out, they would fight to the death. If the 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry were all wiped out here, Dowling Vast Habitat's situation would be the worst in thousands of years. Clenching his fists, Wuji barely managed to recover some strength. Banning our Taoist faction, you have to break our mountains and destroy our temples, killing millions of our disciples. Ruler doesn't think you are too vicious. Our Dowling Vast Habitat is in the wrong for this matter. But my disciples didn't do anything wrong. Zhong Shou scoffed coldly. If he died today, then what about his wife and race in Gantian Mountain? In this world, was there anyone who could say that Zhong Shou was in the wrong? Then, He waved his hand and directly sliced off Wuji's head. This heaven and earth, this world became peaceful, sandalwood fragrance rose up, threads of transparent white smoke that could calm one's heart spread throughout the room. However, this incense wasn't able to ease up the heavy atmosphere here at all. Inyu's face was dark and sunken, his eyes lost as he looked out of the opposite door. Although it was the start of the 9th month, for some reason, the imperial city was covered in snow. At this moment, he still didn't have the mood to admire the beautiful snow scenery. He was originally in secluded meditation in Hidden Dragon Mountain but was interrupted halfway. Then, when he returned to Yangshin Hall and learned about what had happened, this was the situation. He was startled as he looked out of the door. Who knows what he was thinking about? Although it was snowing, the sky was dark. The sun and moon couldn't be seen, only one star shone through the thick cloud layer and appeared in the night sky. That was the Alcade of the Big Dipper, one of the 3 fierce stars, Army Destroyer, looking into the eyes of the people in the room. It was so eye-piercing. Which means that Kong Yao's fate didn't affect our Taishang, but because she was affected by our Taishang, which was why her fate declined. Who knows how long passed before Inyu suddenly spoke. The officials beside him were all silent. Only Zhongshuan replied with a defeated expression, "That's right. It was his responsibility to protect the fate of the great Shang dynasty." After resting for half a night, his injuries were much better. At least he could meet people. This woman is similar to the Alcade, but her fate is hidden. Only when she has the commander's seal and leads millions of troops can she respond to the stars. As he said that, Inyu broke out into a laugh. However, he wasn't smiling at all. Instead, it was filled with self-mocking intent, giving off a cold intent. This woman isn't a famous commander, but her general talent is above average. However, she can lead millions of troops. She was supposed to be the pillar of our Taishang, but I personally gave her to someone else? Everyone in the Yangshin Hall had bitter expressions on their faces. Zhongshuan's expression was even uglier as he said bitterly, "I am useless, I misjudged her." However, Inyu shook his head slightly. It was hard to predict one's fate. If one only believed in fate, how could one rule a country? He himself didn't believe in fate. The reason why he let such a talent go was because of him. As a ruler, he didn't know how to use people. Because Kong Yao had fought dozens of battles and was only above average, he looked down on her. At this moment, thinking back to the past battles, this woman's grasp of the overall situation was extremely accurate. What was more surprising was that Zhong Shou, the monster king of a small country, actually had such foresight. He planned long ago to trick her into coming to Gantian. He was even more decisive to hand over millions of troops to her. A few months ago, he was already regretting it. However, at this moment it was too late for regret. However, he originally had enough patience to wait for Kong Yao to grow. He was also willing to give her a chance to lead the army. However, why did he miss out on the future pillar of Taishang? A sharp glow flashed in Inyu's eyes. That's right, it was the Kong family. If it wasn't for the entire Kong family pressuring that pair of father and daughter. When Gantian sent the envoy to talk about the marriage, they weren't so eager. Or maybe he, Inyu, wouldn't have made such a rash decision. Zhongshuan was the rock of the country. Even if he made a mistake, there was a reason for it. Naturally, he wasn't wrong. He, Inyu, wasn't wrong either. Then, the only one at fault was the Kong family. This entire race had bad intentions, colluding with the Yang family. They deserved to die. Send the decree. Imperial astronomer Kongli was too lazy today and spoke too much nonsense. He is demoted to Imperial Astronomer Young Master. Just as he said that, he saw Internal Affairs Junior Supervisor Garo walk in with a few message talismans in his hands. Inyu's expression changed, his brow rising as he asked, "Is there news from the east? How is it?" Garoa came back to his senses, following which he bowed solemnly. I heard that Zhong Shou and Kong Yao used the mirage to counter the enemy, defeating the night demon army and killing 1,000,000. The Blood Cloud cavalry didn't suffer any losses. Only 40% of the 2,000,000 soldiers died. Yin Yu's hand trembled slightly. Then, his voice became more serious. Kong Li is demoted to Imperial Astronomer. Kong Xian lost his teacher and humiliated the country. He can be captured and killed. Chapter 680. They were both in the imperial capital, but within the main hall of the Kong family, there was a totally different relaxed atmosphere. Kong Li sat at the top seat. He was really relaxed and had a calm expression. Beside him, there was another person sitting shoulder to shoulder. If Zhong Shou was here, he would definitely recognize this person. It was Wei Hai, who he had killed a few months ago. At this moment, his head was lowered as he bit into a half-cooked beast leg. There were a few Kong family people sitting beside him. They all gave off the aura of an aristocratic family disciple, not trying to suck up to him and not being rude. Kong Li smiled, waiting for Wei Hai to drink a bowl of wine in large mouthfuls before he opened his mouth. Commander Wei is really magnanimous. Swallowing 3 cows a day, it seems like your injuries have healed. Wei Hai roughly wiped his mouth and scoffed coldly when he heard that. Healed my ass? My physical body was destroyed. Although this body is not bad, it only has 80% of its original combat strength. If I want to recover, it will take 8 to 10 years. After he finished, his eyes were dark and cold as he looked towards the east, filled with endless vengeance. That Zhong Shou really got off easy. If he doesn't die to the night demons, I will definitely take his life in the future. This person really deserves to die. Kong Li smiled and shook his head. That monster king's actions are indeed incomprehensible. However, it isn't random. Looking at his intentions, he wants to use our Taishang and the Huizhou city army to heavily injure the night demons. Looking at the elite troops under him, a large portion of them are in Gantian Mountain. Or maybe he knows that our Taishang wants to retreat, which is why he did that. However, this person is really despicable. Commander Wei is really valiant, and in the future, you will lead the army and sweep Donglin. Wei Hai scoffed, slightly delighted. However, he shook his head in pride. You can't say that. Your race member Kong Yao's ability to use troops is indeed extraordinary. Even if we lose this time, we can ensure that Gantian Mountain doesn't suffer any losses. Sweeping Donglin, those words are too far away. The moment the 2 words Kong Yao were uttered, the atmosphere in the hall froze. Almost everyone from the Kong family looked at Kong Li and his son with strange gazes. No one said anything. The future would not be a famous commander. This was the evaluation of the famous generals of the current dynasty. Everyone in the imperial capital knew about the relationship between the Kong family and Kong Yao. He didn't know why Wei Hai mentioned this matter. Kong Li's expression stiffened, then he laughed. Please forgive me, Marshal Wei. This woman is a traitor of our clan and has been expelled from the clan. Now, Kong Li feels annoyed just by hearing it. He sneered coldly in his heart, not caring at all. Although the Kong family was only a mid-sized family in Taishang, they had been running for 10,000 years, and they had hidden spies within the 5 vast habitats. His connection with Taoism was inextricably linked. The current Gantian Mountain was not far from defeat. He waved his hand. A servant brought up a jade box and placed it in front of Wei Hai. Wei Hai's eyes squinted. He didn't take it, glancing sideways at Kong Li. He knew that the banquet had ended and they had reached the main topic. The latter smiled. Within the box is a bottle of black jade soul firming ointment and 3 essence spirit heaven extreme pills. They might be able to help you. The Kong family doesn't ask for much, just for you to take care of my Xian. Wei Hai's eyes flashed when he heard that. The black jade soul firming ointment could allow him to grasp this body a few years earlier. As for the essence spirit heaven extreme pill, it was a variant of the heaven extreme pill. Its price was 10 times that of the Heaven Extreme pill and could help him break through to the Heaven realm. As expected from a 10,000-year aristocratic family, you are really rich. Laughing out loud, Wei Hai waved his sleeves and kept the jade box. He looked at Kong Xian, who lowered his head. The conflict this time has been resolved. Your son is a hero, and if I have a chance, I will naturally promote him. Kong Su and Kong Xian's expressions were instantly filled with joy. At this moment, Wei Hai looked at the sky outside of the hall. Speaking of which, there should be news from the east. What is the situation now? His gaze then landed on the resplendent star in the sky. This Alcade star is so strange. On a snowy night, all the stars are dark. Only this star can be seen, and it is actually a little eye-piercing. You all are a divination aristocratic family. Do you know what this means? Kongli was slightly startled, and then he was deep in thought. I have observed it before. It means that a famous general is born in this world. It should be in the southeast, the land of the barbarian race. The fierce star will definitely kill many people. Sigh. Before he finished, a person at the door suddenly spoke out. However, I heard a few elders say that the appearance of the Alcade star today is because of Kong Yao. Yao is the army-breaking star. She is the unparalleled famous commander. Everyone in the hall was instantly silent. Especially Kong Su and Kong Xian, their expressions were the most awkward and ugly. They held their wine cups tightly and suppressed the rage in their chests. Since Kong Yao led the Donglin army and went up against the 2 million troops of the Night Demon army and didn't lose, there were many rumors that His Majesty destroyed the table in the reading room. Slowly, there were different voices within the race. Before this, they removed Kong Yao and Kong Rui from the family tree. Although there were voices of unhappiness within the race, they could be ignored. However, today, it was slowly becoming more and more chaotic. The person who spoke out was someone who had a good relationship with Kong Rui. How much have you learned about astrology? You dare to speak so arrogantly. Elders in the race? Just some old fogies, how can they be trusted? Kongli was expressionless, his eyes half closed as he scoffed. So what if it matches the Alcade star? After today, the stars will dim and fall into the mud. Esteemed guests are here and you actually dare to speak such nonsense. Throw them out and go reflect on your mistakes. The moment he said this, a few generals stepped in. However, the teen who spoke laughed coldly. He got up and walked out of the hall alone. However, it was also at this moment that a series of rumbling sounds came from the main gate in the distance. Groups of fully armored soldiers charged in. One person walked at the front. His red robe was really eye-catching in the snow. It's eunuch Gao Rua. Kongli was shocked, he didn't know what was going on. He didn't understand why this close servant of the emperor would come in the middle of the night. Just as he was about to get up and bow toward Gao Rua, he saw that the door was opened. After the other party stood in front of the palace door, he looked inside coldly and opened a bright yellow imperial edict. His Majesty has decreed that Imperial astronomer Kongli doesn't know the time and is lazy, ostracizing his colleagues. The evidence is clear. Thinking about his father and ancestors, Kongli is diligent in country matters. Today, he is pardoned and demoted to Imperial astronomer. Kongli's entire body shook, his head dizzy. He raised his head in disbelief. How did this happen? Did Gao Rua fake the imperial decree? Imperial astronomer to imperial astronomer, this was a demotion of 7 grades to the lowest level of the imperial astronomer. Gao Rua's words weren't finished. There is also titled Governor Commander Kong Xian, who bewitched the main general and treated the people cruelly, causing our Taishang to lose our morals. He also humiliated the country and lost hundreds of thousands of troops. Order the 3 law divisions to capture him and interrogate him. If he can't be forgiven, he will be executed in public. Kongli's head felt even dizzier. Even Wei Hai's face turned ashen white. Although this decree had nothing to do with him. However, since he was bewitched, then he had to be accused of being muddle-headed. His expression couldn't help but turn dark and cold as he stared at Kong Xian. At this moment, there were dozens of soldiers who went up to capture Kong Xian. However, his expression remained blank as he allowed the dozen or so people to capture him. A moment later, he knew how to struggle and hollered out, "Impossible! Impossible! If you want to punish someone, you can always find a reason. I, Kong Xian, won't accept this. As a general, I naturally have to be unscrupulous. Gantian mountain sneak attacked us when we weren't prepared. What did I do wrong? Release me." He still wanted to see how Kong Yao lost and how Zhong Shou died. He still had to lead the army to revive the Kong family. How could he die? Those dozens of soldiers weren't fazed at all. Dozens of bone-piercing nails were forcefully nailed into Kong Xian's chakra meridians and then locked him down with chains. Kong Li's body trembled, forcefully suppressing the urge to save him. He raised his trembling head and looked at the red-robed official in front of him with pleading eyes. "If Junior Supervisor can tell me the reason, I will be grateful and will give you a huge gift." Gao Ruo frowned slightly. Then, he couldn't help but sigh. Forget it, the Kong family would find out about this matter sooner or later. His Majesty wouldn't blame him for this. Today at noon, Kong Yao used a special plan to break the enemy. Out of the 1.8 million night demons, only less than 3,000 remained. The army fought for a night and only lost 40%. Kong Li's body shook, his eyes filled with disbelief. Subconsciously, a series of thoughts flashed through his mind. Zhong Shou won and all the elites survived. Then Huizhou was already in the bag. 1.2 million elite troops under him. If they faced a spiritual wave, half of them would be able to advance. It wasn't just these people who would be able to train their martial path. It was a theory from 10,000 years ago that if one excluded the alien races, they would be able to obtain the fate of the Cloud World, speaking of which, Kong Yao was indeed Yaoguang. However, this shouldn't be enough for His Majesty to vent his anger on the Shen family. Then, he thought back to the Liao King and the Yang family. That should be the main reason, right? His Majesty was smart, so how would he not be wary of the princes and the aristocratic families? He didn't say anything because it wasn't the time. This was a punishment for 2 crimes. I was the one who was too anxious. Gaoruo also heard Zhongshuan mention that the king energy in the east has been rising. He should have obtained the help of a good general, and within 10 years, he might become the overlord of the southeast. That Kong Yao was implicated by your Kong family, which was why his life was so bad. Now that it is solved, his name will shine across the 4 oceans. Kong family head is also a divination expert, so you should know whether or not these words are true. Grand Teacher wouldn't say such things. Kong Li was startled and looked towards the east. Before this, he didn't notice, but now he could see clearly. It was like a red cloud was sweeping towards the east. He didn't know who the good general was, but the good general was definitely Kong Yao. He looked towards Yaoguang. As expected, it was bright and white, without any black or gray energy. His heart tightened, but he felt that something wasn't right. Even if Zhong Shou won, he shouldn't be able to avoid being killed. Why was there such a situation? He had the Taoist faction and Confucian faction to help, so was His Majesty not worried at all? He heard Gaoruo say leisurely, "There is news tonight. Dowling Vast Habitat's true martial 7-segment sword formation, 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry were all wiped out in Huizhou. However, it hasn't been confirmed." Before he finished, a loud laugh spread out from within the hall. Everyone looked over. It was the Kong family teen who spoke just now. Chapter 681. When Wuji woke up in a daze, he only felt that his eyes were at a loss. Looking around, there were smooth stone walls with Taoist scriptures drawn on them. After being stunned for a moment, Wuji noticed that this place should be his cave in Dowling vast habitat. However, why was he here? Shouldn't he be in Huizhou, preparing to lead the 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry to wipe out Zhong Shou's blood cloud cavalry? Knitting his brows, Limitless found that the source spirit in his body was extremely weak. His 4 limbs and body were a little weak, like he hadn't moved in a long time. With his spiritual sense, Wuji knew the reason. This was the second soul that he placed in his cave to nurture as well as a spare body. He couldn't help but frown. What happened? To be able to make the second soul wake up at this moment, unless his main body had already died, Wuji was instantly infuriated. Who dared to do such a vicious thing? Although he was still here, the loss of his main body was so heavy that it was no different from dying. Half of his soul being destroyed directly caused close to half of his 1,000 years of lifespan to be destroyed. As for this flesh fetus, although it was nurtured from its own flesh and blood, it was still extremely weak. However, to reach the level where his soul and body were completely merged as one, it wouldn't be possible even in a few hundred to 1,000 years. He was one of the deacons of Dowling vast habitat. Even if the demon sect wanted to attack him, they had to think carefully. Who was so bold to not fear the revenge of Dowling vast habitat? Moreover, in his hands, there was a cavalry that could destroy a city and destroy a country. Thinking about it, a name flashed across Wuji's mind: Zhong Shou. Only this person wouldn't fear Dowling vast habitat. Only this person had a reason to attack him. Then, were the 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry under him still there? His heart tightened and Wuji couldn't sit still anymore. He directly got up and walked out of the door. The moment he walked out of the cave, Wuji felt that the atmosphere in Dowling vast habitat today was really weird. In the past, it was really peaceful. However, today, many disciples were either hurrying about anxiously or filled with rage as they discussed. Many gazes looked towards him. Some were sympathetic, while others were resentful and despised. Wuji's heart sank again as he flew into the air. After a short while, they arrived in front of a vast stone hall. The hall was called Dao Extreme. When Wuji stepped in, he felt that the atmosphere here was cold and heavy, close to freezing up. Wu Su, the palace master of the Holy Ji Palace, was frowning as he sat in the seat of honor. There were dozens of people sitting beside him. They were all elders and deacons of Dowling vast habitat. Xiao Xiangzi was also among them, but at this moment, he no longer had his usual cold arrogance. Instead, he sat at the very bottom with a cautious expression. What happened to Huizhou Island? Why did my main body fall? Wuji asked as soon as he stepped in. Since he didn't understand, he naturally had to ask in a righteous manner. Everyone in the hall looked at each other in silence. However, there were a few who were close to Wuji and explained. Zhong Shou defeated the night demon and killed our vast habitat Minghui and 7 true martial swordsmen at the peak of 7 Cloud Mountain. Then, he sprinted for thousands of miles. Your main body and the 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry were all wiped out. Wuji's eyelids jumped. He knew that this was the outcome. However, when he heard it now, he was still shocked. 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry all died? Along with Minghui and the true martial 7-part sword formation. As for the Xian and Tong sect heads who followed along, they were probably dead. Although it wasn't like the sky had collapsed, it was the biggest nightmare for Dowling vast habitat in these few thousand years. Dowling vast habitat only had 15,000 grade 6 Dao soldiers accumulated over the years. This time, they lost close to half of them. His mind was in a daze. Although they were thousands of miles apart, there was still some mental connection between him and the main body. Now that he was inside the person's body, many images appeared in his mind. Thousands of cavalrymen were like raging waves crashing against the shore. However, they were unable to shake that thin and weak figure who was like a pillar supporting the heavens. Speaking of which, I sacrificed my life for our Taoist faction? One sentence caused the few elders and deacons who were staring at them to be startled. Wuji continued to ask, that Zhong Shou blocked our 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry alone? How was he able to block them? How could 7,000 of them all be wiped out? He didn't say those words just to make excuses for himself, but because he was really confused. Even if they couldn't win, they could split up and flee. Grade 6 martial cultivators couldn't travel in the air. However, that Xian Flame Golden Qilin beast could travel 10,000 miles in a day. His allies sitting nearby instantly understood. That is because Zhong Shou blocked you for 15 minutes before the Blood Cloud cavalry rushed over. This person killed 1,000,000 night demons and his strength didn't decrease at all. He also has Huizhou and the strength of the country increased. Gathering the strength of a country, his strength is similar to when Xin Shao descended a year ago. He should be able to block 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry for a short while. As for why they were all wiped out, the person who spoke frowned slightly. I don't understand. He should have used other methods. Wuji was startled, like he thought about something. It should have been something really important to Dowling Vast Habitat. However, he couldn't recall it at all. He saw the gazes of the people around slowly becoming deeper and deeper. Wuji stopped his train of thought for a moment. Wuji has already said this. This Zhong Shou's strength is far from that, and he might not have lost to the night demons. If the assassination failed, his retaliation would be something our Dowling Vast Habitat couldn't take. What now? Everyone in the hall was silent. Wuji's words totally removed the responsibility. However, it was expected by everyone. If he was really confident to pull Wuji down from his deacon position, he wouldn't have been able to do so. Just now, he wouldn't have allowed this person to enter the hall. He forced this person to say such words because he had other motive. Almost everyone, intentionally or otherwise, turned their gazes towards Taoist Wu Su, who was in the middle of the seats of honor. I heard that Zhong Shou has sent an order to the country to ban the Taoist faction and wants to break our foundations. He won't rest until he dies? This person is going against the flow, and sooner or later, he will be punished by the heavens. But at the end of the day, whose fault was it? If it was me and I was forced to such a state, I would also do the same. If we followed Wuji's plan to be on good terms with Gantian Mountain, we wouldn't have faced such a calamity. The spiritual wave hasn't risen, and our Dowling Vast Habitat has lost close to half of our troops. He didn't know his foundations and acted rashly. It was just too risky. Even if it was a Xian grade mine, he shouldn't have done that. We have to give an explanation to the disciples for today's defeat. Lingyun's sect has already sent a letter to our vast habitat. They have suffered the greatest losses from Gantian Mountain banning the Taoist faction. Although they suffered heavy losses today, they are after all one of the shrines. If we cause the various sects to turn against one another, how can Dowling Vast Habitat continue to be the leader of the Taoist faction? After today, our Taoist faction will have one more enemy. That is what makes us worry. Discussions once again broke out in the hall. Although they did not know what was going on. Their words all pointed towards Wu Su. Wuji kept silent. In terms of responsibility, Minghui was the leader. If it wasn't for this person who persuaded his senior and senior brothers to pressure him, Wu Su wouldn't have been so arrogant. Wu Su's decision wouldn't have been so rash. However, now that Minghui was dead, this person was killed 200 years ago in the outer region. However, he wasn't lucky enough to use his second soul to revive like him. He couldn't help but look towards Xiaoxiangzi with pity. This person was the pride of the heavens but was personally smashed into the dirt by Zhong Shou. His current situation was probably even more awkward. Wu Su was his master and loved him a lot. Even he didn't believe that he didn't want to take revenge for the Huizhou matter. At least when Minghui was pressuring him, Senior Brother Wu Su would have gone with the flow. There would probably be numerous voices of blame within the vast habitat. However, at this moment, Wuji's heart was filled with rage and hatred. Speaking of which, all of this was caused by this kid. Wu Su was expressionless, sitting there like a dried-up tree. He allowed everyone to discuss and didn't speak. 30 minutes later, his brow moved and he opened his eyes. His gaze was as sharp as an arrow. Enough! Just 2 words, but they were like thunder. It caused the entire Daoji hall to fall silent. However, everyone's gazes were filled with mocking intent. Most of them laughed coldly as they waited quietly. I have already asked for forgiveness from the senior ancestors and I have already received a reply. Wu Su will speak on behalf of me. He swept the hall, his gaze stopping on Wuji for a moment before he retracted it. Wu Su can't push the blame away. However, the few of us also praise the Huizhou matter. The rise of Gantian Mountain is one of the biggest variables in the next 100 years. If we have a chance, we will definitely wipe it out. This time, Wu Su didn't differentiate between the truth and lies and acted rashly. We can remove him from the position of Dowling Palace head and let him take over the matters of the vast habitat. When he spoke, his expression was really solemn, using the tone of the Dowling vast habitat ancestor to speak. Everyone listened solemnly and were startled, their faces filled with disappointment. In the end, they didn't pull this person down from the position of palace head. When Wuji saw this, apart from frowning, he sighed. Even if Wu Su didn't remove him, he wouldn't feel happy. He only felt that there was a power struggle within the vast habitat. The Taoist faction sects had been fighting for 10,000 years. They all had control of the heart of the vast habitat. The closer it was to the spiritual wave, the more uneasy it was. The death of 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry is indeed heartbreaking. However, to our vast habitat, it doesn't hurt our foundations. It was a cold sentence that was understated. Wu Su's eyes closed once more. We can compensate them. We can also call back the outer sect disciples to build another 10,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry. Since Zhong Shou wants to fight to the death with our vast habitat, then it is okay. This person's barriers from heaven will be broken within a few years. The 2 ancestors of the vast habitat will also return to the cloud world today. 2 years later will be the day this kid dies. Wuji's eyes lit up and he felt much more relaxed. The Taoist faction had numerous temples in the cloud world and numerous disciples. It was just that many of them weren't supported by the vast habitat. Losing 7,000 grade 6 divine stones wouldn't hurt their foundations. With the 4 ancestors taking charge of the mountain, they would be able to safely pass this weakest period. Following this, he felt that something wasn't right, but he couldn't remember what it was. Chapter 682. Lo Xian Grade Mine Stone Mine? So that's the case. Huizhou Island, within a large city known as Hui City. Zhong Shou was sitting in the city, within the palace that originally belonged to the city lord. He looked at the few mined stones in his hand in surprise. They were translucent and looking at them, there seemed to be clouds surging within. These were the hidden guards under Ruoshui who sent people to send them over. They were all Xian grade mined stones, most of them were low grades. However, there were only a few that reached intermediate grade. Looking closely at where the Taoist faction cultivators entered and exited. In a short few days they noticed this mine. Looking at the situation, it should be a rich mine. Ruoshui's hidden guards just dug at the end of the mine, and they got these few mined stones. Zhong Shou frowned. In his memory, he didn't remember the existence of this mine. However, he wasn't surprised. When mined stones reached Xian grade, only spirit realm cultivators and above could use them. It was definitely occupied by the sects and normal people wouldn't be able to come into contact with it. Naturally, there were no records of it in history. Speaking of which, It would be weird if the cloud world didn't have such a Xian-grade stone mine. After all, this was the ancient era, a world that many outer region alien races saw as the celestial world. It was because this world had many spiritual items and rich resources, which was why many outer region powers were eyeing it. The questions from before were all solved. A low Xian-grade stone mine was still rare even 100 years after the spiritual wave started. If they occupied it at the start of the spiritual wave, who knows how many experts and Dao soldiers they could nurture. A normal high-grade stone mine could provide for 1,000 grade 6 Dao soldiers. Then this low Xian-grade stone mine could provide for at least 10,000 people. If it was a rich mine, it was even possible for 12,000 people. No wonder Dowling vast habitat was so heartless. A Xian-grade stone could provide for his book of Ian Extreme Life for 10 days. If he got this mine, then he wouldn't have to worry in a short time. One day could be used as dozens of days. Then, Zhong Shou shook his head. Although it was on his territory, this mine was something that his Gantian mountain couldn't swallow. Especially at such a time when they had totally turned on Dowling vast habitat and wouldn't rest until one of them died, they couldn't show any weakness. You can send someone to inform Tsang Xingdao of the Kenzo sect, and have them send an emissary to negotiate. By the way, you can inform the Buddhists as well. With this profound grade or vein, Tsang Xingdao would have a legitimate reason to help him in the future. As for the Kenzo sect, they returned the favor. Naturally, the 10,000 sword vast habitat had to pay a sufficient price. The addition of the Buddhist sect was just a side benefit. At the foot of the Seven Cloud Mountain, there were still millions of souls of soldiers who had died in battle. They needed Buddhist high monks to perform a ritual and transcend. Other than purifying the resentment there, he also had to calm the morale of his troop. Actually, the demon sect could also borrow their strength. However, Zhong Shou naturally hated them. He also knew that these people wouldn't have any gratitude and would only look at benefit. A smart person wouldn't make himself an enemy of the entire world. As the ruler of a country, he couldn't let himself do whatever he wanted. Amongst the righteous path, there were hypocrites and evil people. However, since the demon path cultivators cultivated those evil, bloody and cruel demon path techniques, they weren't good people. Gantian Mountain should be able to get half of the profits from this Xian grade or vein. However, it was an unexpected fortune. At least he didn't have to worry about the compensation that was giving him a huge headache. From Lianyun Island to Seven Cloud Mountain, the millions of soldiers who died, although most of them weren't under his rule, they were forcefully captured. However, Zhong Shou was still planning to wait and see. The Ministry of Rites and the Kenzo sect of Tsang Xingdao will deal with this Xian grade or vein matter. A clanging sound spread out from beneath the city lord throne, interrupting Zhong Shou's thoughts. I heard that the ancient lizard dragon wouldn't swim to shallow areas. Phoenixes and Luan phoenixes wouldn't go where the water is. Since ancient times, nobles all knew how to protect themselves and wouldn't enter dangerous areas, much less the ruler. Now that the ruler doesn't have any children, you need to be more careful. When Zhong Shou heard that voice, he felt a headache. The one who spoke was Zhang Huai. At this moment, his face flushed red, filled with rage. Why didn't he notice that this fellow could become a loyal official? I know that the ruler is brave and invincible in the cloud world. However, those who are good at war die in battle, those who are good at swimming drown. How can the ruler not be wary of himself? If the Blood Cloud cavalry came a little later, if Wuji's ability to lead troops was stronger, would the ruler be able to escape? If anything happens to the ruler, what would happen to us, the subjects, then? While speaking, Zhang Huai sneaked a glance at the little puppy lying on Zhong Shou's shoulder. At this moment, the scales had already disappeared, the flames on its paws were also gone. It was sticking out its tongue and licking Zhong Shou's face. If it wasn't for this Qilin, This ruler that he had acknowledged for less than 3 months would have most probably lost his life. One person facing 7,000 purple Chilan flame spear cavalry, wasn't that asking to die? Thinking about that, he felt even more rage in his chest. I think that Zhong Yuan and Yin Yang should be killed. They knew that the ruler was in a death situation, but they didn't stop him. This isn't the way of a subject. Zhong Yuan stood at the side, silent and expressionless, not willing to argue. It was his fault that he wasn't able to stop him this time. He looked at Zhong Shou with a bitter expression. He didn't hate Zhang Huai, instead, he was grateful. If he could make the ruler more careful in the future, that would be for the best. The hall was dead silent, no one spoke up to defend Zhong Shou. Kong Yao's face was ashen white, she was also a little afraid. She was happy to see the Taoist faction take revenge. However, she didn't expect that Zhong Shou would take such a risk. Zhong Shou was speechless, looking around the hall for help. Wherever his gaze landed, everyone would dodge to the side. He thought to himself that these people were really vicious, everyone was betraying him. They weren't even willing to give him a way out. Blocking the enemy alone, although he didn't expect that Sherry would be so threatening to the Xian Flame Golden Chilan beast. However, at that time, he was 50 to 60% confident that Zhong Yuan could rush over in time. If he couldn't, then he would just flee. Fighting 7,000 cavalry alone. The ancient overlord was just SOSO, it wasn't embarrassing however, at this moment, he couldn't say those words out loud. At this moment, his entire body felt like it was falling apart. His bones were broken in dozens of places, the meridians in his body were in a mess. When he was fighting against the 7,000 purple Chilan flame spear cavalry, his spirit was shocking and he didn't give in at all. However, if not for Sherry suddenly showing off his strength and Zhong Yuan rushing over a little later, he would at most be able to block 1 or 2 more waves of attacks before he would have to consider fleeing. Zhang Huai was still looking over aggressively. Zhong Shou smiled awkwardly. Based on what you said, there won't be a next time. I will be careful. He was the king of a country and also a swordsman. If he had to fight, he definitely wouldn't retreat. Such a promise was already the limit. The people in the hall seemed to know that they couldn't force him too much, their tense expressions relaxed. Zhang Huai's expression also relaxed slightly. Then, he handed over another document. There is another matter. Ruler's Taoist wiping out decree has been returned by the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Secretaries. They also told Zhang Huai to report to Ruler that he doesn't dare to accept the decree. Even if Ruler forcefully pushes it out, the Prime Minister will stop it in the meeting hall. The moment he said this, Zhong Shou's 10 fingers clenched so tightly that cracking sounds could be heard. Zhang Huai's expression didn't change. Prime Minister Rin said that as a ruler, I can't send troops because of anger and can't decide politics because of happiness. Breaking ties with the Taoist faction can't stop people from Taoist Tao because of that. I also can't punish people for talking about Taoist scriptures. This is a ruler's random decree. Ruler, please think about it carefully. Zhong Shou's face flushed red, the golden chair in his hand slowly turned into a fried dough twist. This damn old man actually came to reject his intentions. What was he trying to do? What he said made sense, but where would Zhong Shou's face go? He had tolerated this fellow for so long. Apart from that, what else did he say? Ren Tianxing's heart pounded as he felt the chilling pressure coming from the hall. He thought to himself, Uncle, what are you thinking? What if the ruler gets angry and cuts off your head? There was a reason why he banned the Taoist faction. Those Taoist faction cultivators were asking for death. There was no need to anger the ruler over such a small matter. Zhang Huai's eyes seemed to close slightly. Thinking about it, he said honestly. He said that ruler's actions are just to use the chance to attack the Taoist faction. He wants to cut off their power in the secular world and take back the land of the various temples to increase the strength of Argantian Mountain. Although this policy is good, there is no need to drag down the innocent. If our Gantian mountain has sinners, we will punish them if we don't punish them. We are not far from the destruction of our country. If we are worried about the various temples causing trouble, we just need to use methods to make them willingly break away from the control of Dowling vast habitat. Sowing discord, heavy taxes, and even showing allegiance are all good methods. Kong Yao frowned. If the ruler's power couldn't be extended, this was the true sign of a country being destroyed, right? She couldn't help but gloat as she looked towards Zhong Shou. What happened today was all because of Zhong Shou's actions. He couldn't blame anyone else. Who knows how Zhong Shou would deal with it? Kill Renbo with one knife? Impossible. On account of Ren Tianxing's face, he would definitely let him live. However, he wouldn't have a good time. No ruler would be able to accept Renbo's actions. Zhong Shou was in deep thought. A moment later he gritted his teeth. Then let's split it into 2 decrees and let the meeting hall discuss it. He was really unwilling in his heart as he gritted his teeth. If this happened again, then he really couldn't take it. The dozens of people here were startled when they heard that. Then, they came back to their senses. Zhong Shou was actually giving in. He actually didn't do anything to Renbo. Zhang Huai's eyes flashed and then he and Ren Tianxing bowed deeply. They were really sincere and respectful. Zhong Shou was a little confused as he looked at his chest. That red gem actually floated up from his chest and shone with a red light. This time it made one feel annoyed. Kong Yao was speechless, but at the same time, she felt at ease. She thought to herself that she had to ask her father to help. This treasure probably wouldn't be able to suppress the ruler's king energy. Chapter 683. She walked back to her bedroom unhappily from the main hall of the so-called temporary imperial residence. Zhong Shou still felt a little stuffy in his chest. However, moments later, he burst out laughing. His plan had been completely seen through by that damned old man. When the Buddhist sect was at its peak, they occupied 5% of the cloud world and had billions of people. However, the scale of the Taoist faction wasn't any weaker than that. During these years, they had been prosperous and didn't suffer any losses. Along with the incense money, at least 5% of Donglin's annual production went to them. It was really unbearable for him to see that. Although he chased away Lingyun's sect and many other sects in Donglin, he didn't deal much damage to the Taoist temples under his rule. He originally didn't want Dowling vast habitat to be in such a bad state. However, since they had already turned on each other, then there was no need for him to be polite. He could allow sects to exist, but he definitely wouldn't allow them to be strong. Now that the Taoist faction was the strongest, even if he couldn't totally wipe them out, he had to tear them apart. He casually took out a few battle reports and flipped through them. After the battle with the 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry. After the battle with the purple flame Qilin, he went into secluded meditation to heal up until today. Who knows what the situation was like at the various places? After roughly reading a few memorials, a smile appeared at the corner of his lips. At this moment, 90% of the Night Demon army west of Seven Cloud Mountain had been wiped out by Kong Yao, Ren Tianxing, and the others. Only a little over 1,000 escaped into the deep mountains and forests to hide. These were the true elites of the Night Demon army. If they chased into the forest, they would instead give the enemy a chance. This was why Kong Yao only used the army to lock down and didn't go in deep. Those fleeing Huizhou people also started to return to settle down. In a short 10 days, Renbo had already transported billions of stones of grain to Huizhou. It was enough for the people here to eat for over 100 days. Based on what Zhang Huai said in the report, they might not be able to arrange everything properly, but they could ensure that everyone would have enough food to survive the autumn and winter seasons. At the end of the 8th month, they could still plant grain for one more season. They were trying their best to restore the land, especially those numerous mines in Huizhou. What happened next made Zhong Shou raise his eyebrows. Zhang Huai had already taken over the land west of Huizhou. At this moment, the imperial decree said that these fields could be distributed to the families of the soldiers who died in Seven Cloud Mountain as compensation. As for the rest, they could be sold. It wasn't that he didn't like Zhang Huai's decision, but he was rather surprised. This move could really be said to be vicious. Once this plan was implemented, Gantian Mountain would be able to digest the entire Huizhou in a short few years. However, from now on, Zhang Huai's image in the Senate Hall would be completely destroyed. Although the people of Gantian Mountain didn't have much connection with the nobles of Huizhou, they would still be worried. He knew very well what those fellows were thinking. He couldn't help but sigh. What he liked the most was officials who didn't care about reputation and were willing to take the blame for him. Unlike Rinbo, who went against him every day. However, with a flick of his finger, he turned the document into ashes. Then, he took out a piece of silk and wrote an imperial edict according to the drawings of a cat and a tiger. Then, he stamped it with his seal. I treat the ruler as my trusted aide, so the ruler should treat me as a brother. He flipped open Zhang Huai's second document. It was to ask him to stop corruption. Not only did it target Huizhou and Donglin, but it also included the meeting hall. He instantly felt more comfortable. As expected, Zhang Huai knew what he was thinking. If he didn't beat those people up, how could he be happy? During these few days, some people were getting more and more out of hand. Since Zhong Shou followed the rules he set, then naturally, he wouldn't allow others to do as they wished outside of his rules. Renbo might be working with these people, so it was best if he didn't catch anything this time. The last document came from Navy Admiral Gu Laikong. There wasn't much at the start, just that the Night Demon Navy had fled. The last few lines surprised Zhong Shou. It said that Shi Rulin led 23-toothed turreted ships to lead the few Night Demon ships into the Oblivion Cloud Ocean. Then, for some reason, they managed to capture a small half of the Night Demon ship. One of them was perfectly fine. The other two could still be used after some repairs. Zhong Shou instantly opened his mouth wide, unable to close it. These were the spaceships of the Night Demon race. They weren't made to conquer the Cloud Ocean, but they were giant beings that could travel through space. This was why just 20 of them could cause Gu Liekong's 1,000 ships to be unable to deal with them, even if half of the Night Demons were on land. However, there was no lack of experts on the ship. If they couldn't win, they could choose a weak spot in the space barrier and consume large amounts of mind stones to tear open space. He really didn't know how Shi Rulin did it. Was this the first battle of the top general of the Navy for the next few decades? Shaking his head, Zhong Shou only felt that it was unbelievable. Unfortunately, Gu Laikong only roughly wrote about the battle situation in the document. He only said that Shi Rulin led the enemy ships to where the demon mist wrapped around and led the beasts to attack. She also borrowed the strength of a few barbarian races below the Cloud Ocean. This was a small victory over the Night Demons. As for the specific situation, it didn't go into detail. Zhong Shou's eyes squinted. Compared to the Cloud Continent, Shi Rulin was probably more suited to the area below the Cloud Ocean. Using her strengths to counter the enemy's weaknesses? From this document, one could see that Shi Rulin made use of the right time, place, and people. 3 spaceships, each one along with the war equipment on it, was worth 3,000 grade, 9 mind stones. When she returned, he would reward her with a bag of candy. No, Rulin had already grown up, so it was better to change to something else. After reading the document, next was the letter of credence. The most important one was naturally from Taishang. First, he admitted that Weihai and Kong Xian's actions were against the morals of the Taishang Emperor and that he had punished them. Then, he changed the topic, expressing his gratitude before starting to scold him. Even if Weihai and Kong Xian were guilty, they should be handed over to the Taishang. Zhong Shou's actions were a little inappropriate, taking matters into his own hands. However, the two countries were brothers, so naturally, there was no need to be so calculative about such a small matter. The last few sentences were hinting for them to send an envoy to Taishang to apologize and give them a way out. However, the entire document only had one meaning. They weren't willing to fall out with Donglin at such a time. Zhong Shou burst out laughing. As he had expected, they really treated him as Nanbatian. There were also other letters from the powers of the few islands near Huizhou to express their greetings to their new neighbor. Most of them were fawning and trying to get on his good side. Only one of them was expressionless with a little bit of scolding. Nanfeng Yu Dynasty? Zhong Shou's eyes settled down and then he tossed it aside, not bothering about it. So what if he occupied Huizhou? Could the great Yu Dynasty ruler run over to bite him? Thinking about it carefully, speaking of which, the current situation of Gantian Mountain was really good and not just a small one. Zhong Shou couldn't help but be startled. Since everything was settled, he could relax and break the heaven barrier. Chapter 685. Apart from these memorials, there were also many documents sent over from Donglin Cloud Continent. Zhong Shou didn't plan to take a look, casually tossing it to the side. He flipped his right hand and a heaven and earth bag appeared in his hand. That day when he used the One Origin black sword to heavily injure Jia Mingluo and cut off his 4 arms. This heaven and earth bag was hidden in his sleeve. Zhong Shou casually kept it but till now, he didn't have time to see what was within. He reached in with his spiritual sense and felt that there was a strong seal at the mouth of the bag. However, its owner was already dead and Zhong Shou didn't need to use much strength to break it open. In the next instant, Zhong Shou sucked in a cold breath. The inside of this cosmos sack was truly spacious. He had 2 to 3 of the last grade 9 heaven and earth bags in the cloud world, but at most, they were 10,000 feet wide. As for the one in his hand, it was tens of thousands of feet in length, width, and height. The space within it was equivalent to a small city. If one used grain to fill it up, it could feed 100,000 elites for a year. At this moment, it was filled with things. Many pieces of metal were lined up neatly within. Zhong Shoxin had a thought and took a piece in his hand. Then, he shook his head in disappointment. This should be the Black Demon Gold. The armor of the millions of troops of the Night Demon Army was mostly made from this. It could increase the combat strength of the Night Demon Army and also block sunlight to a certain extent. It should be the backup resources for Jia Mingluo to conquer the cloud world. Who knew what use it would have for the human race? With a spell, piece after piece of Black Demon Gold ingots surged out from the heaven and earth bag. They passed through the palace gates and piled up on the green stone drill grounds in front of the palace. Ocean amounts of Black Demon Gold piled up like a mountain. Only when the heaven and earth bag in his hand was totally empty did he stop. At this moment the space within the bag was really wide. Only the left corner was left with something. Zhong Shou's eyes shone brightly. As expected of one of the 8 princes of the Night Demon clan, his wealth was far greater than his own. Those pills might not be suitable for a human's physique. However, there were 2 to 3,000 grade 9 spirit stones over there. As for the higher grade Xian grade mind stones, there were over 400 of them. Grade 9 mind stones were enough for him to use the Book of Ian for a day. In that case, even if this profound grade spirit stone was a low grade one, it could still be used for about 10 days. The harvest this time was incomparable to all the savings he had accumulated in his previous life. The rest of the books were the martial arts classics of the Night Demon clan. Unlike the cultivators of the human race, they were divided into spirit and martial Tao. From the start, the Night Demon race was not split into spirit and martial arts. Only after reaching Heaven Realm did they start to split. This was also due to the special constitution of the Gu clan. Among them, there was one book that was the most unique. It was completely different from the other books. Zhong Shou took it out with his spiritual will, only to see that the cover was dark and deep, without any words. However, if one scanned it with spiritual sense, one would know that there were the words 7-star Xian Lightning Book. When Zhong Shou flipped it open and looked at page by page, his expression was really interesting. This wasn't a cultivation method passed down by the night demon race, but a classic of the Taoists of the cloud world. It seemed like 10,000 years ago, the cultivators of the cloud world not only absorbed the martial path essence of the night demon clan, they also learned a lot in the cloud world. There were a total of 7 pages, and the contents had to be sensed with spiritual sense to know. However, after the second page, there were additional conditions. One needed to grasp the power of lightning to a certain extent before one could open it. A total of 7 lightning techniques were recorded, similar to that of power. However, if one had all 7, based on what the book said, one could reach the peak of the lightning path. As for Jia Mingluo, he had only grasped one of them. Who knows if it was because his foundations were still the cultivation method of the Night Demon King race. Zhong Shou's purple lightning ability was far above that of the Red Star God Lightning. When he fought with Jia Mingluo, he was only suppressed because his cultivation was much lower. However, in terms of grade, it was far from what he could reach. He flipped all the way to the 4th page of the book. Every page was as heavy as a mountain, and countless words and runes were recorded on them. Taking a rough look, he felt that the grade of this book was at least a grade 10 Saint Spirit treasure book. If it was as the book said, that the combination of the 7 lightning could reach the end realm, then it would be able to be ranked as grade 11. Zhong Shou himself didn't focus on lightning technique. However, after taking a rough look, he felt that the lightning phoenix mark in his soul had changed. More rune-like structures were stretched out, and the spirit tattoo lines that were already there also underwent some changes. It didn't increase by much, but it seemed even more profound and profound. It also seemed even more obscure and exquisite. He couldn't help but be deep in thought. It seemed like the lightning techniques recorded in this book were recognized by the lightning phoenix mark that came from the ancient god beast. Who was the one who recorded this book? Who created this lightning element spell? This scripture could be said to be quite useful to him, even if he couldn't cultivate it. Using the Tao to increase the strength of his purple lightning was a good idea. If he had time, he could study it. Following this, Zhong Shou smiled and looked at the side of the heaven and earth bag. At this moment, the mind stones in his hand could last him for dozens of years. Why not just pick a day? He also needed some time to digest the gains from the battle with Jia Mingluo. Thinking about it, Zhong Shou directly took out the Book of Ian and smashed a low Xian grade mind stone. When threads of spiritual energy were absorbed by the Book of Ian, the flow of time around Zhong Shou suddenly became weird. 30 days later, still within the sleeping hall of the moving palace, Zhong Shou was deep in thought as he looked at his hand. A ball of crimson lightning flickered and danced in his palm. This was the Red Star God Lightning. Based on his thoughts, it suddenly turned into a ball and then into a net. He was far from cultivating this lightning element spell and wasn't as good as Jia Mingluo. However, another purple lightning glow shone in Zhong Shou's palm. When the two met, the purple lightning instantly devoured the scarlet divinity lightning. Then, the aura exploded and it was even more overbearing. Threads of lightning glow sizzled in the air. Zhong Shou's eyes constricted. This power was 20% stronger than his original purple lightning ability. If this Red Star God Lightning was completely cultivated, then 30% wouldn't be a problem. The reason he studied the 7-dipper Black Thunder Cannon was to perfect the Lightning Luan imprint in his primordial spirit. However, he didn't expect that there would be such a surprise. As for what the book said about the combination of the 7 lightnings, one could reach the peak of the lightning path, he believed it a little. Since this Red Star God Lightning could merge into the purple lightning, Then, what would happen if the other 7 lightning spells were all cultivated? Zhong Shou shook his head. Although he was looking forward to it, he knew how difficult it was to cultivate the 7-star mysterious lightning book. It was best if he placed it aside first. Thinking about the time, Zhang Huai should have settled down Huizhou. During this month, there wasn't any news of a rebellion. The reason he was here was to back him up and keep watch over this place. Now that there was nothing, he could return to Donglin Gantian. At this moment, he sensed something. Zhong Shou's brow furrowed. He stood up and walked out of the hall. Pushing open the door, he saw a teen whose back was facing him as he looked into the sky. It was Ao Kuan. Zhong Shou had sensed this person's aura when he was in the room. However, at this moment, his eyes were filled with surprise. He didn't understand why this fellow was here. When Zhong Shou came out, Ao Kuan smiled as he turned around. That person's disciple will be able to return to the cloud world in at most a year. Zhong Shou's brow furrowed. That person? Who was it? Looking at Ao Kuan's complicated gaze, he understood. Ao Kuan was most probably referring to the person who sealed him in the stone wall for 10,000 years. This person is from the Taoist faction and most probably came for you. I can deal with 2 of them, but 1 fist won't be able to fight 4. Zhong Shoxin's heart sunk slightly and then he laughed coldly in his heart. At this moment, he had expected that a year later would be when he would break through the heaven barrier. However, he didn't care much about this matter. If he was willing, he could borrow the power of the Book of Ian and at most in a few months he would be able to break through the heaven barrier. If he wanted to accumulate more and ensure that nothing went wrong, then he could run to the common people's vast habitat to break through the heaven barrier. This Taoist faction Saint Realm expert wouldn't go so far as to fight Song Xingdao because of this, right? Then, he had a thought. If one said that Ao Kuan specially came to remind him, Zhong Shou definitely wouldn't believe it. He had already predicted this matter when he attacked the 7,000 purple Qilin flame spear cavalry. How could the honor of the Taoist faction be so easily insulted? He had slapped Dowling vast habitat and if that Dowling palace head Wu Su didn't do anything to get back their face. If he didn't lose face, then he wouldn't need to be the palace head anymore. What is the matter? Zhong Shou's eyes were filled with suspicion. Looking closely at Ao Kuan, he only felt that his aura was changing continuously. Although he wasn't in an irritable and restless state, he was still unable to calm down. It wasn't weird for it to appear on anyone. However, Ao Kuan was already in the Saint Realm. I can't hide it from you. Ao Kuan laughed bitterly, shaking his head in a self-mocking manner. In the end, I used the destruction dragon pellet to improve quickly. I thought that I could control it, but in the end there were still some changes. Longing that old man can't be disturbed now, as long as I come here to ask for help. Zhong Shou was startled once more. Even a Saint Realm expert couldn't solve this problem, so what was the point of coming here to ask for help? Did he have to make another trip to the Dragon Hall? Or to search for some treasures? This time, he might not have such good luck. He saw Ao Kuan casually pick up a piece of broken stone from the ground. Zhong Shou looked carefully, only to see that the broken stone was directly destroyed in Ao Kuan's hand. First, it directly turned into dust, then it turned into even finer particles and then scattered into spiritual seed. In the end, even the psionic energy was completely shattered. It was similar to Osamu Hara's spiritual explosion sword intent. After that, it stopped. Ao Kuan's eyes were also filled with a lost expression. Chapter 686. Zhong Shouxin was enlightened and roughly understood a little. This Ao Kuan most probably couldn't find his future Dao, which caused the energy in his body to change. His destruction Dao also stopped at that point. This wasn't something that spiritual items and treasures could solve. Other people wouldn't be able to help either. Ao Kuan didn't come to find him because he expected him to be able to help him. Instead, he came here to listen to his opinion and search for inspiration. Frowning, Zhong Shou was in deep thought. Speaking of which, he didn't really dabble in this destruction Tao. However, 10,000 years later, he heard that at the end of the spiritual wave, there was someone who could easily wipe out tens of worlds. Legends even said that he could destroy this region. He also cultivated the destruction Tao. Then, how about we start from the Grand Path Laws? When he said those words, Zhong Shou's fingertip carefully poked. Within this area, there was a wave of spiritual energy turbulence. 5-colored spiritual light shone continuously. The entire space was close to collapsing. However, this weird scene returned to normal in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Zhong Shou's face was ashen white, looking extremely weak. In the blink of an eye, he had broken a string in this world. To destroy a small and insignificant law in this less than 100 feet region, he paid the price of using up all his true qi and spiritual energy. At this moment, as long as one had some strength, they would be able to take his life. However, he didn't care about the weakness in his body as he looked forwards with a questioning gaze. He remembered that the person grasped such a Tao to directly destroy the source of the world. This method can work. I was right to come to find you. As expected from the person who comprehended the true 99 long Ing sword within 7 days. Although he said that, Ao Kuan was still frowning, his face becoming more and more bitter. In the past, when Ao Kuan was trapped in the stone wall, he wanted to destroy everything in this world. Why can others be free and unfettered outside, but I, Ao Kuan, have to be trapped within this stone wall and forgotten by everyone? However, after he came out, perhaps due to the passage of 10,000 years, his evil aura had completely dissipated. I no longer have these thoughts. Coincidentally, a withered leaf fell to the side. Ao Kuan caught it in his hand and looked at it with a complicated expression. Although there are many ugly and filthy places in this world, there are also places that make people reluctant to part with them. Ao Kuan was unwilling to destroy it. This is why we can't continue on this destruction Tao. A gentle breeze blew, causing countless withered leaves to fall, making Ao Kuan's figure seem unusually sad and desolate. Zhong Shou felt his scalp go numb and his teeth ache. This Ao Kuan really disgusted him. He couldn't be bothered to deal with him, so he directly exposed him. Brother Ao, could it be that you feel that the Tao of destruction is insufficient to deal with powerful enemies, and want to find another path? He totally understood that the destruction dragon 10,000 years ago was able to step into the peak of the God realm and was half a step away from the Saint realm. He didn't believe that the destruction Tao didn't involve the destruction of laws. Ao Kuan obtained the dragon pellet, so it was impossible for him to have no idea about the progress of the destruction Tao. The reason why he was so conflicted was probably because he wasn't satisfied with his own combat strength. His cultivation had been achieved through a shortcut in the first place. Even if it didn't leave any hidden problems in a short time, he wouldn't be able to advance. Then, the only way was to work on his foundations. Only with the source of the Tao far above others would he be invincible in the same grade, and even be able to jump realms to fight. He thought back to the weird expression on Ao Kuan's face when he talked about that person's disciple. Zhong Shou roughly knew what was going on. Thinking about it, he couldn't help but sigh. Although the destruction Tao was only one change, power could definitely be listed in the top 20 of all the Taos. In terms of the Tao level, he could be listed in the top 10, on the same level as the creation Tao. It was one of the most basic Taos in the world. The only thing was that the cultivation path was slightly tougher. However, with the destruction dragon as a foundation, if Ao Kuan continued down the path, who knows, maybe when the spiritual wave ended, he would have the ability to stabilize at the end realm. During that era, not only would low-grade cultivators like them be able to increase their strength, to God Realm and Saint Realm people it would be a huge fortuitous encounter. He grasped such a technique, and this fellow was still not satisfied. As expected, Ao Kuan smiled, revealing his white teeth. Little Shou really knows what I want. It is impossible to find another path. Ao Kuan just wants to add some changes to the destruction Dao to increase power. Moreover, my destruction Dao is just too strong. When fighting with others, one has to control one's strength. It is indeed a little inconvenient to destroy a country and a world so easily. Zhong Shou was speechless as he raised his head and looked into the sky. Just as he was about to say, "Scram." However, before he could say anything, a whimsical thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Thinking about it for a moment, Zhong Shou cut off a strand of hair from the back of his head and waved it in front of Ao Kuan. Just as Ao Kuan didn't understand, Zhong Shou flicked his finger. Instantly, a strand of hair broke off. What is the meaning of this? Ao Kuan was still confused and didn't know what he meant. Each strand of my hair can be seen as a person's life and can also be seen as anything. The top half is the past and the bottom half is the future. That finger just now was your art of destruction. The strand of hair broke because you destroyed it. This item won't exist in the world, so naturally, it won't have a future. Ao Kuan frowned and roughly understood what Zhong Shou meant. However, what did this have to do with his destruction Dao? In the next instance, Zhong Shou suddenly flicked his finger. An entire strand of hair instantly turned into black dust and scattered. Then, if I destroy this entire strand, what will happen? Ao Kuan's pupils constricted and he was totally startled. A moment later, his eyes were filled with surprise and excitement. Erase all traces of the existence of a person or an object in the world. This method is really cruel. However, Ao Kuan, like it. However, this isn't a pure destruction Dao. Zhong Shou nodded his head slightly, naturally. It involves the spacetime Dao. I am just saying it for Brother Ao to use as a reference. Although he raised such an idea, he himself didn't have high hopes for it. Such a great Dao was actually more difficult than destroying dozens of worlds. Wiping away the traces of an item existing in the world was easier said than done. Ao Kuan's lips curled up when he heard that. Spacetime? Not only that. To grasp such a Dao, the most important thing was cause and effect. Although Zhong Shou was a genius, his cultivation was too low and his foresight was lacking. It was just that he, Ao Kuan, happened to have such a foundation. Only because the cause and effect dragon pellet was snatched away by someone, he had no choice but to walk the destruction Dao. Chapter 687. His gaze changed. A moment later, Ao Kuan heaved a sigh of relief and smiled as he asked, "Why would you think of such a method out of nowhere?" He felt weird in his heart. If there was no reason, one definitely wouldn't be able to think of such a path. Zhong Shou laughed when he heard that. He waved his sleeves and a silver light flew out. Like an illusion, in the blink of an eye, it was in front of Ao Kuan's eyes. That sharp intent caused even Ao Kuan's brow to rise. How quick! At the critical moment, his two fingers casually pinched in front of him. Then, a flying dagger finally appeared in his hand. It shook continuously like it was trying to break free. However, under his suppression, it used up its remaining strength and the entire knife body turned into dust. Ao Kuan's eyes couldn't help but constrict. This knife was infused with Zhong Shou's 9 true dragon sword intent, reaching the peak of the soul realm. However, to him, it wasn't worth mentioning. What he was truly concerned about was the speed of the saber. It was really quick. Naturally, it couldn't hurt him, but it far exceeded the spirit realm. When the flying blade came slashing down, there was a strange feeling. It was as if the space that the blade passed through had been shortened. Thinking about it, Ao Kuan knew the reason. It is the power of time, so that is the case, It wasn't that the space was shortened but that the time where the flying knife passed was accelerated. He finally understood why Zhong Shou would think of such a suggestion. That's right. What does Brother Ao think of this knife technique? Zhong Shou smiled. These 30 days, with the acceleration of the Book of Ian, it was a full 300 days, close to a year. He wasn't just studying the 7-star Xian lightning book. Actually, most of the time, he was thinking about how to improve this 6-god defensive knife technique. Using the soul to nourish the knife, merging the knife intense, this was the essence of the 6-god defensive knife technique. Along with the Sky Fox illusionary technique, it was even more nimble and able to change directions than Spirit Master sword driving technique. This 6-godly saber was almost always on target. However, the higher the level, the more powerless this 8th-grade earth-crushing martial art became. The power was sufficient, but every time it hit the opponent, it would consume close to 70 to 80% of its power. It was the same when he fought Jia Mingluo. Even when he was heavily injured, he couldn't kill Jia Mingluo. It had already become chicken ribs, tasteless to eat, but a pity to throw it away. Zhong Shou had long had the idea of improving this flying knife technique. Now that he was about to break through the heavenly barrier, what he needed the most was a powerful force. With the Book of Ian in hand, he would have more than 10 years. He could complete his accumulation and push some of the absolute techniques that he grasped to their limits. His first choice was the 6 gods defensive blade technique. Using the time acceleration technique that he had recently mastered, it complemented each other perfectly. It was also because he had been thinking about the time technique, which was why when Ao Kun asked, he immediately thought about this aspect. Not bad. However, this knife is a little weak and can't take it. Sweeping the powder in his hand, Ao Kun frowned. This knife seems to have swept away many changes. Although it is quick, it isn't as nimble as before. Zhong Shou smiled helplessly when he heard that. Ao Kun's evaluation hit the nail on the head. His grasp of the time path wasn't enough. He could only speed up time on a straight line. Once he changed directions, the speed would drop by several times. Apart from that, it was also because the flying knife was too quick. His spiritual sense was unable to control it in time, so naturally, it wasn't as nimble as before. The material of the flying knife was also a little lacking. His current cloud flame flying knife indeed couldn't take the power of time. He remembered that he had crafted this set of flying knives for 2 years and now it was already a little outdated. However, at this moment it could barely be used. Just as he sighed, thinking that this knife technique wasn't worth a mention in the eyes of a grandmaster, Ao Kun looked over with a weird expression. However, in my eyes, Zhong Shou, you are putting the cart before the horse. To pursue extreme speed and also to keep the changes from before, you are at a disadvantage. With your intellect, Zhong Shou, why don't you know that you can't have the best of both worlds? Actually, you just need this knife to be a little faster, just 30% faster. Then no one below Heaven Realm can take a hit from this knife. Zhong Shou was startled when he heard that, following which his lips curled up. Thinking about it, he was indeed too greedy. Actually, he had such a plan in his heart. However, he had been hesitating, hoping to perfectly combine the speed and direction-changing ability of the flying knife. Ao Kun's words woke him up and he finally made a decision. With that thought rising up, Zhong Shou waved his hand once more. Another silver light slid out from his sleeves. In just an instant, it was in front of Ao Kun's eyes. Once again, Ao Kun's fingers grabbed onto it. However, this time, there was a clanging sound as the entire blade exploded. That tyrannical sword will rushed out. Although it was instantly smashed by Ao Kun, a blood wound appeared between his fingers. It was undetectable and instantly healed. Ao Kun was slightly distracted when he saw that. Even when he gave pointers, he had already predicted the future of this flying knife technique. However, at this moment, he couldn't help but be shocked. This blade was actually able to injure him, Ao-kun? Of course, it was because he was caught off guard and Ao-kun's physical body wasn't strong and his aura wasn't stable. When Zhong-shou attacked, he obviously borrowed the power of the King Path. His strength was at the celestial realm level. However, the person who attacked wasn't at heaven realm. What a quick knife speed! Compared to before, it was at least 50% faster. Zhong-shou had obviously given up on all the changes in this knife. The power contained within the knife body was more than double of before. Essence, energy, and spirit merged into one. Strength and knife speed were pretty much a perfect combination. It was like there was also a bit of fate power within. Taking in a deep breath, Ao-kun asked with a weird expression. How many of these knives can you make? Zhong-shou was also stunned. After a short while, he came back to his senses. Within a day, I can only make 3 knives. Within 3 months, I can only nurture 5. The key was to control time. It consumed too much energy. The burden on his mind was also really heavy. Essence and energy merged, chi and spirit merged. As long as he was in his best state and was connected to the heavens, he could only do that. However, he could only maintain it for a short moment. Moreover, there was the power of fate. Even now, he was unable to accurately control it. Moreover, each 6-god knife needed him to spend a large amount of time to nurture it. Only 3 knives? Ao-kun muttered. His expression was complicated. He was a little disappointed but also heaved a sigh of relief. Luckily, if this knife could be casually shot out, then other people didn't need to live anymore. He thought to himself, as expected from the book of Ian Extreme Life. Zhong-shou just studied it a little and his combat strength increased so much. The time Tao was indeed worthy of being one of the strongest great Tao laws in this world. Originally, I was worried that you wouldn't be able to deal with the tribulation. Now I am at ease. Naturally, Ao-kun wouldn't think that Zhong-shou wouldn't be able to break through that layer. Although it was a tribulation, what he was most worried about was that it was man-made. Naturally, he and Longing would deal with those celestial realm and god realm and saint realm people. However, under that, they still had to rely on Zhong-shou himself. There were many experts in the Taoist faction. Whether or not the demon sect would stop them was still a question. Although the sky demon vast habitat wanted to express goodwill, the demon sect was much more chaotic. However, the demonic Tao sects were even more chaotic than the Taoist Tao sects, so how could they listen to his orders? However, now, each time he thought back to Zhong-shou's knife, Ao-kun felt pity for those people who would be so unlucky as to be the first to fall under this flying dagger. He looked at Zhong-shou's soul and it was close to perfection. He had accumulated enough strength, and once the 18 talismans were completed, then he would break through. Today, he actually came over for that. He wanted to repay Zhong-shou's kindness. Who knew that in the end, he would owe him even more? You have 18 talismans now, are you still lacking 2? When Zhong-shou heard this, he looked curiously at Ao-kun. Naturally, he couldn't hide his current realm from this person. What he didn't understand was why Ao-kun would mention this matter for no reason. Speaking of this talisman matter, he had been worrying about it recently. Today in his soul ocean, he had universe, Ian, yang, lightning, sun, luck, stack, swallow, spit, purify, illusion, life, death, spirit, 16 true talismans. However, the last 2 words had been delayed and hadn't been formed yet. He had a few choices in his heart, but Zhong-shou felt that it wasn't appropriate, so he hesitated and didn't choose. After all, this concerned his future achievements in spiritual cultivation, so he had to be careful. In the next moment, he heard Ao-kun laugh. If you don't have a better choice, then how about the cause and effect talismans? If you want your 6-god defensive knife technique to hit and kill in one knife, you have to work on the cause and effect path. Cause and effect. Zhong-shou's expression changed, following which he broke out into laughter. Naturally, he was clear about the weight of the cause and effect path. It was one of the most basic paths in the world, no weaker than the universe. Similar to fate, it was the most indiscernible and indiscernible law in the world. Time, fate, along with cause and effect, Zhong Shou also wanted it, but he didn't dare to hope for it. To be able to grasp the universe, the black and white holes, as well as the life and death and luck, he was already very lucky. As for cause and effect, it was far from what he could touch at his current realm. Even if he wanted to comprehend it, he wouldn't be able to. Moreover, cultivators like them relied on the word essence. The talismans in his soul were enough for him to study. He really didn't have much free time, along with these two paths. Ao Kuan didn't say anything. After smiling, he directly turned around and stepped into the void. He came suddenly, and when he left, it was also really sudden. Zhong Shou was just thinking about why this person left so hurriedly. He didn't need to borrow his Book of Ian to take a look, only to see a scroll appear in front of him. Chapter 688. Taking the scroll, Zhong Shou felt that it wasn't right. It was soft to the touch, but there was a thin dragon scale on the back that was extremely tough. It was obviously a piece of dragon skin of a high grade. Zhong Shou was stunned, thinking to himself, did this come from Ao Kuan himself? Looking closely, he realized that it wasn't. Looking at the appearance, it most probably came from a god realm dragon. It was less than 30 feet long, but it was made using a condensing technique. It was made by tearing off the entire stomach of a 30,000 feet long giant dragon and using a secret technique to refine it. Moreover, it definitely didn't exceed 3 years. He couldn't help but sweat. As expected from an ancient evil dragon. During these few years, he was alone outside the cloud world. Who knows what bad things this fellow did? In his heart, he was filled with anticipation towards the contents of the scroll. Words carried the Tao, but there were many theories in the world that normal words and paper couldn't take. This was why the materials of the high-grade talismans in the world were so precious. For Ao Kuan to specially use a god realm dragon skin to craft it, one didn't even need to think to know that the things recorded in the scroll were definitely not ordinary. Flipping it open and taking a look, Zhong Shou's pupils constricted. At the top of the scroll, there were only 3 words, cause and effect. Just the 2 words cause and effect took up a full 3 inches of space. At this moment, Zhong Shou actually just took a look and he felt annoyed and dizzy. Hurriedly closing it, Zhong Shou felt a little better. Following this, he was silent. He knew that Ao Kuan wouldn't come to find him for no reason. Just as Zhong Shou was in a daze as he held onto the dragon skin scroll, a voice rang out. At this moment, Ao Kuan was standing outside of the cloud world, in the void. The unstable aura around him had already calmed down. The mist on the Tao path had all dissipated thanks to Zhong Shou. However, Ao Kuan was still focused on his hands. A tiny withered leaf would appear and disappear from time to time in his hand. For example, Zhong Shou could rewind time. They would definitely be surprised to find that the tree beside the palace was missing a leaf or a branch. Maybe even the entire tree didn't exist anymore. In the end, Ao Kuan's hand suddenly clenched and the dry leaf turned to dust. So that is the case. The stronger something is, the more it affects the world, the harder it is to wipe it out. However, this grand Tao did indeed surpass destruction. It is the Tao of existence and destruction. After being slightly absent-minded, Ao Kuan started laughing wildly once more. His voice was hoarse, and his attitude was insane to the extreme. However, if one listened carefully, one would find that there was a hint of sadness in that laughter. He wanted to thank that person who took his cause and effect. He wasted 10,000 years, but due to a coincidence, he grasped a supreme Tao that no one in the past or in the future would be able to achieve. This was the true Tao and it was unstoppable. Sun and moon came and went, the stars moved. Within the wide stone room, a bit of starlight suddenly flew out. Then, there was a soft thud as it pinned onto a wall. It didn't gather true chi and didn't have martial path intent buffing it. However, just its sharpness alone was able to pierce through the thick stone wall. It also frightened Xiaori, who was playing with little gold. Hanshi, who was just a foot away from the flying knife, its eyes constricted and its body trembled. It was really clear that Zhong Shou's knife was targeted at it. It wasn't injected with time power like in the past. However, this ordinary slash, which didn't even have the slightest bit of true power or soul energy, had almost nailed it to the wall. There was a special power that made Hanshi feel like this knife was destined to stab into its body. It went all out, using its unparalleled movement speed to barely dodge. Opposite it, Zhong Shou muttered in annoyance. As expected, I am still lacking a little. Hanshi only felt that green veins were popping out on its forehead. Even though its bug body didn't have such a structure. If it was really hit by this knife, even if it didn't die, it would be heavily injured. However, it knew that Zhong Shou was using this to warn it. He could only keep silent and become even more respectful and tamed. His eyes also coincidentally revealed a wronged expression. It knew that its master was someone who liked to be coaxed but not forced. This move worked every time. Zhong Shou saw this and felt that it wasn't appropriate to use his spiritual pet to test his knife. He laughed and casually waved his hand to summon back the flying knife. At this moment, a year had passed since the battle with the night demons. Zhong Shou's few spiritual pets had improved by quite a bit, especially Hanshi and Little Gold. He thought that the black demon Gold from Jia Mingluo was useless. However, these two fellows treated it like a delicacy. In a year, Hanshi directly advanced to grade 9. The 6 silver fire soldier ants also reached grade 8. Little Gold also showed signs of breaking through to spirit realm. The lightning-winged dragon was his natural protector beast. Their minds were connected and their growth was pretty much the same as his. Since Zhong Shou obtained the 7-star Xian Lightning Manual, his strength increased by leaps and bounds, reaching the peak of grade 9 realm. As long as he broke through the heaven barrier, they could both advance to spirit realm. As for Xiaori, it had the body of a Qilin and had a few thousand years of lifespan. Many bloodline abilities that needed a certain amount of time to obtain had already been grasped. It was born from eating energy. The more king energy it absorbed from Zhong Shou, the stronger it got. Its strength would also grow faster. Just now, Zhong Shou was experimenting with this cause and effect technique. He used up close to 50% of his soul power. He first set an effect that would definitely hit and then there would be a cause. The moment the flying knife left his hand, there was a change that exceeded his expectations. A path that was exquisite to the max, an arc that followed the laws of heaven and earth. It was enough to make any martial path master's mouth agape. If he wasn't clear that this knife came from him, Zhong Shou would most probably think that this was a knife from a celestial realm or even god realm cultivator. In the end, although Hanshi barely dodged it, this outcome made Zhong Shou's heart surge. Saying that sentence was more to cover up and calm down his emotions. There were indeed many flaws in this slash. He wasn't familiar with the control of cause and effect. He was still unable to perfectly stack the power of cause and effect and the power of fate. Moreover, the consumption was a little too huge. If he added in the power of time, the 3 laws would be combined on the knife. Then, this full-strength knife would be enough to suck him dry. Thinking about that, Zhong Shou shook his head. It was best if he used this flying knife technique less in the future. He would only use it when he was in danger or when he confirmed that the surroundings were safe. If not, although this knife could injure the enemy, he would also become a piece of trash. Chapter 689. He temporarily couldn't use the 3 laws together, but he could split them up. Time Blade and Cause and Effect Blade, along with Fate Power, any one of them was enough to kill experts below Heaven Realm. He was confident that if Jia Mingluo was still here, one blade would be able to heavily injure him and even kill him on the spot. Even if he could only use 3 blades a day, it was already amazing. A full 12 years, apart from 3 years of body training and 1 year of comprehending the 7-star Xian Lightning Book, I used the 6-star martial arts and 6-star martial art. It wasn't a loss for me to use the cause and effect laws and the 6-god defensive knife technique. Zhong Shou used a full 5 years to barely get started with the cause and effect theory that Ao Kuan left. Then, he used another 3 years to use it on the 6-god flying knife. At this moment, within Zhong Shou's soul ocean, the 18 talismans were all gathered. Apart from the original 16 talismans, there was also cause and effect. It was still at the true talisman stage. Looking at it, it was even a little incomplete. However, it pushed Zhong Shou's soul to the grade 9 peak realm. His soul power was like an ocean, vast and majestic. However, correspondingly, his martial path progress was a little faster. Using the black mysterious iron sand to train his body day and night, Zhong Shou only used 3 years to train his body to the extreme of heaven realm. He also merged the last 4 heaven veins into his body to reach the peak of grade 9. In the remaining few years, Zhong Shou spent most of his time comprehending the cause and effect theory that Ao Kuan left. His martial path didn't slow down at all. He continued to polish his chakra meridians and various acupoints to nourish his energy. Step by step, he pushed his physical body and true qi to a perfect level. At this stage, Zhong Shou finally understood why there were so many grade 9 experts in the world who had enough ability to advance. However, why did they have to drag it out at this realm? They were afraid that their foundations weren't perfect and thick enough, which would affect their future cultivation. Even if there was only a small flaw, it was still unbearable. Zhong Shou was the same. He wished he had more time. However, his lifespan was about to end and he didn't have any more mind stones to support the Book of Ian. His foundation was already incomparably solid. Every step forward would require 8 to 10 years. It was not worth it. Apart from that, the spiritual wave was just around the corner. At most, it would explode within a year and a half. At this moment, the cloud world could even accommodate spirit realm experts. If he didn't break through the heavenly barrier in the next few years, he wouldn't be able to do it. If he pushed his cultivation to the spirit realm, it would be even more difficult in the future. If it was not necessary, Zhong Shou really did not want to borrow Tsang Xingdao's power. Suddenly, the sound of a bell rang from outside the stone hall. Zhong Shou raised his eyebrows. He knew that it was time for the court meeting to begin. Every time this happened, his father would prepare to go to the Qingjing Hall to discuss government affairs with the officials. However, when it was Zhong Shou, this rule was abandoned. Although it wasn't that he didn't care about anything, Zhong Shou had already spent a full 3 months in this newly built cultivation room. In other words, during these 3 months, he didn't deal with any government affairs. At this moment, he also didn't plan to bother. Especially today, he was even more unwilling to go over. Zhong Shou sat quietly in the center of the stone hall and was in deep thought. His brows were locked tightly. Moments later, his brows relaxed and he made a decision. Forget it. The path of giving up, only by giving up can one gain. Although this true talisman is beneficial to me, in the end, it isn't as good as the path of destiny. Since that is the case, then why do I have to hesitate and not make a decision? With a thought rising up, the spirit word true talisman in Zhong Shou's soul instantly exploded. It turned into numerous pieces. However, just as these broken runes were about to merge into his soul ocean, within Zhong Shou's soul, the yin and yang talismans suddenly gave out a bright light and absorbed all the true talismans. Zhong Shou was startled. This was a change that he didn't expect before this. His brows furrowing, Zhong Shou looked on carefully. He felt that the yin and yang talismans didn't become stronger because of this, and there was also nothing wrong with it, so he didn't pay much attention to it. He thought to himself that most of the laws in the world could be merged into the yin and yang talismans. If he knew that this was the case, he would have perfected the spirit word and waited for it to merge into it. He was too anxious. Luckily, its foundations weren't damaged, and in the future, he just needed to spend some time to repair it. In the next instance, with a thought from Zhong Shou, there was a change within his soul ocean. A life talisman formed in an instant and joined the 18 true talismans. Because the spirit word seal was broken, his soul that was slightly damaged instantly recovered to its previous perfect state. The fate word corresponded with it, and the entire soul ocean was like a tsunami, spreading and expanding outwards. A moment later, Zhong Shou opened his eyes once more. There seemed to be lightning flashing in his eyes. After a long while, it slowly calmed down. The fate word talisman formed and still didn't cause any changes. However, Zhong Shou could clearly feel that his control of the power of fate had become much stronger. In the past, he could only change the future for a period of time. At this moment, when he looked at the few armor-protecting soul beasts beside him, he seemed to be able to roughly guess what these little fellows would face in the future. The images were chaotic and unclear, changing and hard to determine. There were numerous possibilities. As expected, fate wasn't fixed and wasn't something that couldn't be changed. Zhong Shou took a few more looks. Before he was able to accurately see a portion of the future, he felt that his lifespan and soul power were disappearing at a shocking speed. Slightly shocked, Zhong Shou stopped and then gave out a self-mocking laugh. It seemed like although he looked calm on the surface, he still cared about fate in his heart. Unfortunately, the consumption of lifespan was a little too huge. No wonder those famous divination masters in history had extremely short lifespans, and there weren't many who lived long. Moreover, no one was able to use such a direct method to see the future. Based on what he knew, even end-realm experts who didn't age and didn't die were really careful about this. One could see that the price was really huge. However, as expected, the fate and fate laws needed to be merged together to be able to truly grasp the power of fate. He formed a seal with his hands, his fingers intersecting as he led a thread of soul power into the life talisman. It intersected and stretched out like many spiritual patterns. This was the technique he comprehended from the book of Ian Extreme Life. To seal this life talisman, he would lose the ability to see the future as the price. Instead, it would strengthen his grasp of the fate around him in a short period of time. He would be able to be really precise in that short moment. As time went on, it would become more and more blurry. This method could accurately control the power of fate and had an effect similar to Chu Shui's combat martial body. Naturally, the precision mentioned here was only relative and couldn't be truly accurate. The future had numerous variables, and Zhong Shou could only see the tens of possibilities with the highest probability. As for Chu Shui's intuition, when it reached the extreme, it would definitely not be wrong. Once the seal was formed, Zhong Shou started to try. However, after a short 2 hours, Zhong Shou stopped with a green face. This time it wasn't because of exhaustion, but because his head felt really dizzy. Almost at every moment, there were countless possibilities and countless scenes flashing through his mind. Although Zhong Shou's cultivation had reached the peak of the spirit realm, he still felt powerless. However, he still felt powerless. He felt like his head was about to explode. It was incomparably unbearable. At the start, he tried to sense the changes within 1,000,000 feet in the next breath. Then, he decisively retracted. Only at 1/60th of an instant was he able to barely hold on. However, what use could he have in such a short time? Zhong Shou's lips curled up and he was slightly disappointed. Another useless technique that was tasteless. It didn't increase his strength at all. Maybe in the future, when he grasped more of the fate laws or when his brain was strong enough to take on many futures, the situation would be slightly better. However, he had no choice now. Luckily, he didn't have much hope for this technique. As long as he could grasp the power of fate more accurately, he would be satisfied. Casually waving his hand, a light suddenly shot out from his sleeves. Hanshi in the distance. It was prepared and immediately dodged. Its 6 pairs of silver wings flapped as it swiftly turned and dodged. However, in the end, it still wasn't able to dodge that light. Just as it was grumbling in its heart, it felt a light knock on its head. When he looked at it again, he realized that it was just an ordinary black mysterious iron sand. Different from before, the grade 9 cloud flame knives that Zhong Shou crafted didn't do any damage to it at all. However, it was still shocked, its eyes filled with wariness as it looked towards Zhong Shou. If it was any other spiritual artifact, it would have lost its life. It couldn't see through this master anymore. It also didn't have the courage to go up against him. Zhong Shou's lips curled up and knew that his flying knife technique had finally succeeded. Not only could it be combined with the 6-god defensive knife technique, but it could also be combined with other sword techniques and spells. After 12 years of bitter cultivation, there was finally a successful outcome. Laughing out loud, Zhong Shou stood up and stepped out of the room. Coincidentally, it was noon and the sunlight was eye-piercing. Within the Jinqian Hall, a bell rang out once more. A total of 6 bells rang out throughout the entire Gantian mountain city. Zhong Shou listened for a moment before he sighed in disappointment. As expected, it was this old man who was chosen as the prime minister. At this moment, it was close to 5 years since he built the meeting hall. Renbua's term as prime minister was about to end. The results of this change were as expected. Unfortunately, the time that Zhang Huai had joined Gantian Mountain was too short. His experience was too shallow and he didn't have the right to compete with Renbua. As for the others, they weren't as good as this old man. Thinking about it carefully, if he allowed Renbua to go to the meeting hall, the situation would be even worse. This was why Zhong Shou directly gave up on the idea of pulling Renbua down. He could only exclaim in his heart that he needed to be careful of his money for 5 years. The country really didn't have any virtuous ministers. Chapter 690. Rubbing his temples with a headache, Zhong Shou flew up 3,000 feet above the mountain peak. He looked down at Gantian Mountain City from above. One could see that the entire city had expanded by half a size as compared to a year ago. The city walls that were being built before were obviously smaller. They were surrounded by numerous houses. The second outer wall was already being built. The city protecting spiritual formation was being set up once more. Luckily, at this moment, the entire Donglin Cloud continent had calmed down. Under the suppression of 4 million troops, all the cities in Donglin didn't have any wars for a full year. With the prestige of the Battle of 7 Cloud Mountain, no one dared to provoke Gantian Mountain. The entire Gantian Mountain could be said to be peaceful. The only thing that made Zhong Shou unhappy was that the green wind stone paths that he invested in started to have profits. In a short year, he earned close to 300 grade 9 mined stones. During this year, there wasn't such a good thing. The slightly decent large cities in the Cloud Continent were all renovating their road. They were guarding against him like he was a thief. Even if he took over the road rights, the price was huge. How preposterous! Actually, he just charged a little more and the years were a little longer. Those clear wind stone paths were still really well built. Luckily, what you lose on the swings you gain on the roundabout. There were many stone paths. The blacksmithing shops and carriage businesses in his hands were slowly becoming popular. The dozens of horse farms in Donglin Cloud Continent could sell over 100,000 grade 2 mounts each month. They also earned a lot. Apart from that, the merchant tax also increased greatly. In the past, a cloud crossing carriage with 8 grade 2 mounts needed at least 1.5 months to travel from west to east. However, today, it only needed 25 days to arrive. This was because there were many green wind stone paths in the east that weren't completed. If they were all connected, then in just 10 days one would be able to see the cloud ocean in the east. At this moment, looking at the few city gates, there were numerous carriages carrying various goods entering and exiting. At least 10% of all the merchant tax would go into his treasury. The current Donglin already had the atmosphere of the prosperous era 10,000 years in the future. From the looks of it, I still underestimated myself. Who knew that I, Zhong Shou, would be able to rule this country so well? Zhong Shou was a little proud, but he had forgotten that he had not been involved in political affairs for 2 to 3 years. He did not hesitate to take the credit of the cabinet secretaries. He remembered that when he took over Gantian Mountain, he was pretty much broke. But now, just the annual tax revenue was equivalent to the income of 10 or 20 high-grade spirit stone veins. This didn't include Huizhou under Zhang Huai's rule. Then he frowned and looked down. A giant dragon could be seen leisurely swimming through the clouds with a large group of grade 9 flood dragons. This was the Een dragon that had forced its way into the Avicii throne uninvited 2 years ago. However, at this moment, his appearance had changed. Although his body was still illusionary, it was white in color. The scales on his body were like the silver-white flames of Hanshi, filled with a pure and holy feeling. That thick, vengeful energy was nowhere to be seen. Not only this giant dragon, but the other flood dragons were the same. At this moment, even Zhong Shou didn't know whether or not they were considered Een dragons. If they weren't, then what kind of dragon race were they? He had invited Ao Kuan over to take a look, but this Saint Realm expert had a weird expression. He only said that this Een dragon had merged its soul mark with the source of the Avicii throne. Although he could forcefully take it out, he would definitely heavily damage this country-protecting god artifact, so there was nothing he could do about it. After which, Zhong Shou was helpless and was prepared to ask the Buddhist faction for help. However, he was stopped by Kong Rui. According to the new Imperial Astrology Junior Supervisor, this beast was the country-protecting Saint Beast and was connected to the country's fate and luck. Zhong Shou still didn't understand how a thing that took over a nest became the country-protecting Saint Beast. He didn't see this fellow do anything. It either stayed in the Avicii throne and didn't come out, or it roamed the clouds and sunbathed. Speaking of which, it was weird. This dragon's body was huge, 100,000 feet long. However, each time it appeared on the Gantian mountain peak, there was no movement at all. There were less than 10 people in Gantian Mountain who could sense its presence. It was formless and traceless. This could be considered one of the natural abilities of the mysterious Een dragon. However, the problem was that the one in front of him was shining with a bright silver light. Its scales were extremely eye-catching. That giant dragon head passed by his side, not bothering about Zhong Shou at all. Xiari, who was standing on Zhong Shou's shoulder, raised its claws and cried out, like it was warmly greeting this dragon. That silver-white giant dragon finally turned its head. It opened its mouth and roared as a reply. When the dragon opened its mouth, a wind blew and sound waves surged. Xiari was perfectly fine, but Zhong Shou was blown backwards, his hair messy. His lips twitched. Zhong Shoxin had the thought of pulling out the tendons and skinning the giant dragon. However, when he compared its size and the aura that was tens of times stronger than him, Zhong Shou was smart enough to suppress such thoughts. Since Ao Kuan wasn't willing to help, then he could only compromise. In the future, when he stepped into the celestial realm, he would take revenge. Scoffing coldly, Zhong Shou flew into the air and left Gantian Mountain City. A moment later, he was dozens of miles away. It was where the army camp was. Not only was it not abandoned, but it had expanded by a lot. Looking out, one could see that roughly 1,000 feet above the ground, there were a total of 8 giant boats lined up in an orderly manner. The long ones were 1,000,000 feet and the short ones were 50,000 feet. 6 of them were floating in the air. The other 2 were held up in the air by huge wooden brackets. At this moment, there were hundreds of spirit masters who were busy around the 2 spaceships. They were either rebuilding the ship, repairing the damaged areas, or setting up spiritual formations. "It is rare to see, ruler, you are willing to come over to take a look." When this voice landed, a person suddenly appeared beside Zhong Shou. It was Tianqi. At this moment, he was smiling and in a good mood. "Out of these 8 spaceships, 6 have been completed. As for the other 2, at most 2 months they can be completed. Even these 2 broken night demon ships, Tianqi can guarantee with my life that after they are repaired, their combat strength will be much stronger than before. With sect leader in charge, what can Zhong Shou be worried about?" Zhong Shou nodded slightly, glancing at this person and then smiling. "I heard that 2 months ago your Kongqi sect opened up and accepted disciples. As for the number of disciples they have accepted, there are a total of 100,000. Chapter 691. I heard that 2 months ago your Kongqi sect opened up and accepted disciples. There are close to 100,000 of them. If it was other people, Tianqi would suspect that there was some deeper meaning to those words. However, Zhong Shou was really at ease. He knew that it was just a simple question. Even if he was unhappy, he wouldn't do anything. Instantly, a gleam of glee flashed across his eyes. The spiritual wave is imminent, so how can our Kongqi sect not make preparations? Our sect and Gantian Mountain are in the same boat. However, we have fewer and fewer spiritual blacksmiths, so we have to increase our manpower. I think the ruler has some thoughts about this. The important thing was that the current Kongqi sect was able to provide for so many disciples. Huizhou had hundreds of mines, and in this year, Donglin Cloud Continent had many more large-sized mines. This monster king didn't occupy it alone. As long as one followed behind him, they would be able to obtain many benefits. This was why his Kongqi sect had over 10 more mines under their name. Now, he was only worried that there weren't enough people with spirit master talents. Out of these 100,000 disciples, if 2,000 could enter the inner sect of Kongqi sect, he would be satisfied. Kongqi sect had been passed down for 10,000 years, but in his hands, it was slowly becoming stronger. To say that there weren't enough spiritual blacksmiths was true. Today, Gantian Mountain needed more and more high-grade spiritual artifact armors and weapons. The need for low-grade spiritual artifacts also didn't decrease. Since Zhong Shou announced those decrees a few years ago, the number of martial artists and spiritual cultivators gathered in Gantian Mountain increased by the day. The entire country was filled with martial arts. Pretty much every month, there would be hundreds and thousands of Xiantian masters, as well as out-of-body spirit masters, who would report to the cities under Gantian Mountain. These experts who surged out like volcanoes, their desire for a spiritual artifact made the tens of thousands of Kongqi sect disciples feel like they couldn't handle it. At this moment, in this world, if there was anything that could make Tianqi feel worried, it would be it. Only the artifact crafting businesses under Zhong Shou, as well as the few Mahist sects that suddenly appeared in Donglin. Fox race people, as long as their bloodline wasn't too weak, were basically all natural-born spirit masters. The blacksmiths under Zhong Shou's control were not only from the Fox race, because when he ascended the throne a few years ago, he had already begun to nurture them. At this time, although Zhong Shou did not have any blacksmiths under his name, there were many of them. A total of 30,000, no less than Kongqi sect. Moreover, since the Shui clan was annihilated, the Fox clan's vassal clans had submitted to Zhong Shou, and this number had increased to almost 40,000. As a monarch, it was impossible for him to rely on only one family. He had to have a plan to keep them in check. Therefore, although Tianqi was afraid of this, he did not dare to say anything. The ones that truly gave him a headache were the Mahist sect. Most of them moved over from the central cloud continent, and their businesses flourished. It was truly infuriating. The only thing that comforted him was that the Pill Fountain sect was also having the same troubles as them. Zhong Shou broke out into a laugh and didn't reply. He also knew that not long ago, the Kongqi sect and the Pill Spring sect had joined hands to provoke the Assembly Hall to ban the competing sections. Unfortunately, in the end, they had failed. No one was willing for these two sects to monopolize the pill and artifact business of Gantian Mountain. At this moment, Tianqi was recruiting 100,000 disciples, not only because they lacked spirit blacksmith. Stepping in the air, Zhong Shou flew to where the 8 spaceships were. He looked up and down and a trace of shock flashed in his eyes. These grade 9 energy-destroying crossbows are all prepared? 8 spatial shuttles meant a total of 400 class 9 energy-destroying divine crossbows. He thought that Kongqi sect would at least need to wait until the end of the year to complete it. This is all thanks to Administrator Zhang. Huizhou now produces many spiritual ores, and it is enough for our need. When Tianqi mentioned the 3 words, Administrator Zhang, there was a hint of admiration in his tone. However, more of it was pride. Roughly 3 months ago, our Kongqi sect had 7 spirit realm elders return from the outer region. Zhong Shou's brow rose up when he heard that. He wasn't surprised. Originally, the mysterious cloud spiritual house could take in 2 initial spirit realm cultivators. At this moment, the spiritual wave was getting stronger. Not to mention 7, even 9 or 10 were enough. As for the Administrator Zhang in Tianyi's words, he was referring to Zhang Huai. Zhang Huai's current official position was Country Advisor, Gantian Mountain Meeting Member, and Huizhou Administrator. These official titles were neither fish nor fowl, but they were a last resort. A state could have a provincial governor. However, Gantian Mountain only had 6 states, which was why each province only had 1 provincial governor. The administrator was just a temporary position to manage Huizhou. In a year or 2, when it stabilized, it could be abolished. Nodding his head slightly, Zhong Shou didn't bother about these few spaceships. Then, he turned around and walked towards the south. This camp stretched hundreds of miles and could at most house 2 million troops. When Zhong Shou passed through the heavy spiritual formations, he saw that not far away, there were 2,000-man cavalry forces using wooden blades as soldiers. They were fighting in a wilderness filled with wild grass. One side was the Blood Cloud Cavalry, 1,000 of them. They were all dragon-horned winged horses and covered in blood armor. The other side was covered in silver-white armor. Pretty much all of them were fox race people. There were more of them, reaching 2,000. They were all grade 4 cavalry beasts. Thousands of Xian flame golden Qilin beasts stepped on flames, giving off a blazing aura. Although they were at a disadvantage, they could barely defend and didn't show any signs of weakness. Pretty much every one of them could cause a Blood Cloud cavalry to fall off their horse. Tianqi followed closely behind him as he stepped forward. He followed Zhong Shou's gaze and looked over. His eyes were filled with a weird expression as he laughed. "Congratulations, ruler, it seems like this strong army will be formed soon. Our Gantian Mountain will have 1 more pillar." Pillar? Zhong Shou's brows rose up, his eyes filled with unhappiness. This brand new Black Fox Iron Cavalry was formed by combining the strengths of several factions. Blood Cloud Cavalry, Common People's Mysterious Dragon Warriors, Xiang Family Iron Cavalry, Great Qin Iron Cavalry, a total of 4 strong Dao soldiers. All the members were grade 6 experts chosen from the various fox races. However, the outcome wasn't what he wanted. He had spent several months meticulously designing the armor. He also spent many months to deduce the support cultivation method. However, facing the Blood Cloud Cavalry, he could only fight 1 against 1. Sometimes, he couldn't even do it. They looked like their combat strength was similar, but the Black Fox Iron Cavalry were all grade 6 cultivators and most of them had been through hundreds of battles in the outer region. Within the Blood Cloud Cavalry, 30% of them were still grade 5. They hadn't even used the blood cloud technique. He had thought too much. As expected, this invincible Tao soldier could only be perfected after going through numerous battles. Tianqi noticed the disappointment on Zhong Shou's face. Apart from being shocked, he also didn't understand. In his eyes, this Black Fox Iron Cavalry wasn't as strong as the Blood Cloud Cavalry. However, out of all the grade 6 Tao soldiers, they were above average. Even compared to the Tao soldiers of the 5 shrines, they were only slightly weaker. The Blood Cloud Cavalry had many restrictions. Although Gantian Mountain had a Blood Hero God Iron Mine, it was tough to refine it. The crafting of the spiritual armor was also tough. On the contrary, the armor and weapons of the Black Fox Cavalry weren't limited by materials. There were numerous spiritual materials that could be used as replacements. As long as Zhong Shou was willing, within 3 to 5 years, they could expand to 7,000. This strength was already really amazing. After the 7 Cloud Mountain battle, pretty much all the big countries and sects were paying attention to Huaxiao Mountain. They were all paying attention to Kong Yao's million-strong army in Huizhou. The 6,000 Blood Cloud Cavalry increased to 50,000 Big Dipper sword soldiers and Big Dipper crossbow soldiers. There were also more and more elite soldiers who broke through to grade 3 and grade 4. However, they didn't know that in Donglin Cloud Continent, Gantian Mountain City, another powerful Tao soldier that was also at grade 6 and was destined to be famous in the world was quietly being formed. It is best to stop the grade 6 armor that we ordered. When these words entered his ears, Tianqi was shocked as he looked at Zhong Shou. At this moment, although Kongqi Sec's artifact crafting business was really busy. However, the ones with the highest profits were still the high-grade spiritual artifacts that Gantian Mountain made. Then, he calmed down. Tianqi didn't believe that Zhong Shou would give up on such a strong grade 6 Tao soldier. Zhong Shou crossed his arms in front of his chest and was deep in thought. In his heart, he was thinking about the document that was hidden in his sleeve. It was from Kong Yao, saying that Nanfeng Yu dynasty was forming alliances to unify the strength of the various islands. It was similar to the Thousand City Alliance in Donglin, just that it was more loose. The position and use of the Great Yu dynasty was much stronger than that of Longxiang City. Although this island alliance treaty couldn't threaten Gantian Mountain. However, once the various cities locked down Donglin, it would affect the ocean trade tact. This was why Kong Yao requested in the document to lead troops to attack the southeast states of the Central Cloud Continent. Firstly, it was to calm the hearts of the surrounding island powers. Secondly, it was to draw the snake out of its hole to lure Great Yu to attack Huizhou. During these few days, although Zhong Shou hadn't replied. However, in his heart, he had already approved of Kong Yao's plan. However, this woman really loved to fight. No wonder people would say that Kong Yao was an ominous star. Even her father said that her vengeful energy was too strong. She had just stopped for a year, and she had already set her sights on Nanfeng Cloud Continent. With this woman as the commander, he really didn't know if it was a blessing or a curse for Gantian Mountain. At this moment, what he was hesitating about was whether to hand the Black Fox Iron Cavalry in front of him to Kong Yao's hands or use them in the outer region. Just as he was thinking about it, Zhong Shou's expression changed slightly as he looked towards the east. He tossed aside all his thoughts. At this moment, Tianqi's face was ashen white as he looked in that direction. What strong netherworld energy! It wasn't any weaker than when Zhong Shou used the Styx River Death Sword. Zhong Shou's gaze changed again and again. He roughly knew where the netherworld energy exploded out from. 9 Death Witch? She has finally appeared. He actually heaved a sigh of relief. This time bomb had finally exploded. Luckily, it wasn't when he was breaking through the heaven barrier. Sighing slightly, Zhong Shou raised up the Royal Demon God shuttle and smashed the space. In the blink of an eye, he was thousands of miles away as he flew towards the east. This was a problem that he had personally planted. In the end, he had to solve it himself. Chapter 692. Just as Zhong Shou was flying towards the barracks outside of the city, Renbo was sitting in a carriage and coming down from Jing'an Peak. The glow in his eyes didn't reduce, instead, it was much sharper than a few years ago. However, at this moment, Renbo's eyes were looking at the sky outside the window. He could see a giant silver-white long-ing moving its body in the cloud layer, rolling and roaming in the sky. It is silver-white in color, however, it doesn't have a physical body. It is so free, sometimes I really envy this beast. 2 months ago, he could already see this 100,000-foot long ing. However, till now, he still wasn't sure what it was. It looked like a platinum dragon, however, its aura wasn't as sharp and it didn't have a physical body. He said that it was a Xianyin dragon. However, its bright scale armor was majestic and noble, without any evil aura at all. Who knows whether this giant dragon was friend or foe, whether it had any bad intentions towards Gantian Mountain. Shaking his head, Renbo retracted his gaze and asked his nephew beside him, "Can you see it?" Ren Tianxing was also looking, however. His eyes were filled with loss. "Forgive my poor eyesight, I really don't know where that giant dragon is." In his heart, he was already thinking, was his uncle really muddle-headed? Renbo frowned and didn't say anything. He had already asked tens of people this question. Dozens of people said yes, however. In the end, it proved that these people were just trying to get on his good side and saying things that weren't true. As for the other people, they didn't know what was going on. At this moment, even his own nephew denied that he really couldn't see it. Either he, Renbo, was really dim-sighted due to old age, or there was another reason. However, how could it be fake when it was so real? He had already proven numerous times that this wasn't an illusion. Renbo couldn't help but think back to what Kong Rui said. This was the country protecting Saint Beast. Squinting his eyes, Renbo shook his head. He flipped through the history books and those divination books, but he had never seen such a term before. He only heard that the 5 vast habitats had their own protector Saint Beast. If he didn't know the truth, he would have thought that this longing was a trick that Kong Rui came up with to fool people. Although this beast had never caused any trouble, it was not controlled by humans, and was ultimately a hidden danger. Jun Shang probably thought so too. Thinking of Zhong Shou, Renbo's expression turned gloomy and he smiled bitterly. That child was probably really sick of him this time. For such a big matter like the cabinet meeting, they actually didn't even show their faces. It could be seen how much they despised him. His original intention was to protect the foundation of the late king and Zhong Shou. Last year, he submitted the memorial because he did not want Zhong Shou to destroy the country that he had built with his own hand. The kindness of recognizing my worth should be repaid with a ring. Ren Tianxing knew what his uncle was thinking, but when he saw the situation, he didn't think much of it. In my opinion, Uncle is overthinking things this time. If Jun Shang was really annoyed by what happened a year ago, why would he nominate you to form the cabinet? The position of Prime Minister needed the recognition of more than half of the people in the meeting. However, one needed Zhong Shou's nomination to have the right. The few people who were in the election were just there for show. To Renbo, they didn't pose a threat at all. He was a bystander and had served Gantian Mountain for 2 years, so he roughly knew Zhong Shou's personality. Based on what his junior brother said, Jun Shang probably just didn't want to give up his face. Although he was a benevolent ruler, sometimes he was as stubborn as a kid. Thinking about that, Ren Tianxing's lips curled up. Such a ruler was really interesting. Moreover, Jun Shang is wise and won't affect country matters because of one person's preferences. Even if he hates Uncle, there is no need to worry. If it was other people, they would naturally be worried. After all, being with a ruler was like being with a tiger. However, since it was Zhong Shou, Ren Tianxing instinctively felt at ease. Rumbua's brows rose up, following which he sighed leisurely. In his heart, he actually treated Zhong Shou as his junior, a nephew. He had been in charge of Gantian Mountain for close to 20 years and personally watched Zhong Shou grow up. When he was young, he made one worry, but then he turned into a dragon and stood proudly in the sky. The cloud-crossing carriage suddenly stopped. Just as Renbua was feeling weird, he saw a 70-year-old old man hurriedly walk in. It was the butler who had followed him for many years. He entered the carriage and bowed. "Family head Bing, temple head Bailing is asking to meet you. He said that he wants to thank family head for your kindness. I don't dare to act on my own." As he said that, he respectfully handed over a gift box in his hand. Renbua didn't take it, expressionlessly looking out of the carriage window once more, only to see a few Taoists standing in front of the carriage. The one at the front was dressed in white, giving off an elegant aura. He seemed to have noticed Renbua's gaze and bowed slightly with a smile on his face. "Prime Minister Ren's memorial a year ago saved millions of lives of our Taoist faction. Baiyun Temple head Zigui represents our Taoist faction colleagues to thank you for your kindness. I have something to ask of you. Can you meet with us to discuss? Our Bailing Temple will repay you after this and won't disappoint you." Renbua's eyes constricted, following which he laughed coldly. He directly took the gift box and tossed it out of the carriage window. Scram! His tone was firm, not leaving any room for negotiation, filled with disgust. On the other hand, Ren Tianxing sucked in a cold breath, only to see the gift box open outside the window. Suddenly, dozens of grade 9 mind stones fell to the ground. His sincerity was really great. Even he felt that it was a pity. The old servant knew Renbua's intentions and backed out of the carriage without saying a word. Then, the carriage slowly moved forward once more. Ren Tianxing's expression turned slightly solemn. He tossed those grade 9 mind stones to the back of his head and asked solemnly, "Uncle, did ruler call me back to conquer the outer region?" For no reason at all, he was called back from Huizhou. Thinking about it, Ren Tianxing could only think about this matter. On the way back, he was worried about this matter. However, the moment these words were said, he frowned. Zigui? Where did he hear this name before? The cloud-crossing carriage traveled in a neither fast nor slow manner. In just a moment they were thousands of feet away. Zigui stood on the side of the road. His expression was indifferent and cold as he watched Renbua's carriage disappear around the corner of the street. Only at this moment did he casually reach out. He kept all the mind stones on the ground into his sleeves. Then, his face was filled with a smile. "They all said that Prime Minister Ren is really straightforward. Today I see that it is true." There was even a hint of admiration in his words. It was like he wasn't annoyed by Renbua's words at all. The other Taoists beside didn't understand. "This doesn't seem like your personality. It doesn't seem like it." Zigui was really casual. If it was someone else, I would kill him with one sword just because of that sentence. However, this person saved millions of lives with just one sentence. No matter what the reason is, I have to give in to him. As he said that, Zigui suddenly turned his head and looked at another Taoist in a green shirt. This person was really ordinary, his aura was really simple. If one didn't pay attention, one would think that he was a normal person. However, if one looked closely, one would be able to sense the spirituality and elegance hidden under that simplicity. At this moment, this Taoist was looking into the sky like he was observing something, but he didn't gain anything. Thus, his eyes were filled with confusion. Zigui looked towards where he was looking, only to see a blue sky with nothing at all. He didn't understand. "Senior brother Qingming, do you feel that there is something over there?" Qingming's brows were tightly furrowed and he didn't speak for a moment. In the end, he shook his head, "Speaking of which, it is weird. Just now I felt that there was the aura of a saint beast." "Junior brother, please excuse me." "Saint beast." Zigui was stunned. As expected, He looked towards Qingming with a weird expression. Any saint beast needed to be in the form of a soul to be worshipped by the pure thoughts of numerous cultivators. It was similar to a god. The crafting method was really strict. Out of the few factions, only Confucianism, Buddhism and Taoism grasped it. Even their Taoist faction had billions of disciples who had the heart to protect the Tao. However, they only raised 3 God Realm Protector Saint Beasts to protect Dowling Vast Habitat. Under Gantian Mountain, there were enough cultivators. However, in terms of pure thoughts, one could only laugh and not say anything. Be it martial cultivator or spirit master, once one's strength reached a certain level, one would naturally hate restrictions. Especially royalty. Even in Gantian Mountain, where the people's hearts were so united, there was no way to form Saint Beast. Maybe my spiritual sense made a mistake. Qingming didn't care. Then, he looked at the street in front of him with a shocked expression. The first feeling that Gantian Mountain gave him was that it was clean and tidy. After that, flowers blossomed like a brocade. Not only Gantian Mountain City, but a large portion of Donglin Cloud Continent was filled with life. A year ago, the vast habitat sent a message for me to return quickly. At that time, I didn't think much of it. A junior, a small monster king, why did he have to do that? He was making a mountain out of a molehill. Only now did I know that this Gantian mountain monster king had to be wiped out. We need to be really careful and go all out. Zigui kept silent. He was in the same situation as Qingming. At the start, he was filled with disdain. However, only after he returned did he realize that the current Dowling Vast Habitat had made an enemy that they had to get rid of. The people are rich and the country is peaceful. However, the martial arts are flourishing. The Great Path is spread in all directions and merchants are everywhere. This place is even more prosperous than the Mid-Plains. This is a scene that I haven't seen in 500 years. Zigui took in a deep breath, pausing for a moment before he opened his mouth. However, I also heard that this was due to Rumbua's efforts in ruling the country. The moment he said that, Qingming asked, "Do you really believe those words?" Zigui instantly kept silent. He didn't believe those words either. What a joke, those Confucians in the central cloud continent only heard rumors. If they didn't agree with him, they would be seen as going against the Tao. They actually still see Donglin as a barbaric land. Qingming said while laughing coldly, "Although I don't know how to rule the country, that person was able to rule 6 states at 20 years of age. He has millions of troops under him, good governance and peaceful people. How can such a person be a mediocre ruler?" Chapter 693. Although I don't know how to rule, that person was able to rule 6 states at 20 years old. He has millions of troops under him, good governance and peaceful people. How can such a person be a mediocre ruler? Don't let the Confucian faction teachers hear that. Zigui sighed when he heard that. Actually, just looking at Gantian Mountain City, the ability of the ruler couldn't be underestimated. He was also really clear about the strength of the night demons. Even if it was just a remnant army, it was enough to destroy a small world. For Gantian Mountain to be able to go up against them for several months and even wipe them out was really shocking. We are like fire and water with Gantian Mountain. Wu Su is to blame. Taking revenge with grievances, being short-sighted and not worthy of being the ruler of the vast habitat. He let out a cold snort with a hint of dissatisfaction. Zigui's brows rose as he looked into the distance, only to see that at the corner of the street, a muscular person was also looking over. He was 12 feet tall, with the waist of a bear and back of a tiger, like a mountain as he stood there. In Gantian Mountain City, there were many muscular and tall cultivators. The person in front of him was mixed in the crowd and wasn't really eye-catching. Zigue noticed this person right away. First, a killing intent appeared, then it was restrained. It is Yuanshi demon sect's Hai Shangjuan. Qingming, it seems like your old opponent has returned. When Zigue said that, his lips curled up. I heard that Yuanshi demon sect had 2 disciples who died near the 3rd Dragon Hall. I always suspected that it was done by Zhongshou. It seems like this Hai Shangjuan most probably came because of the Monster King's Heaven Barrier tribulation. The muscular man in the distance didn't seem like he had any intention of staying. He looked at them coldly before turning around and leaving. At the same time, a smile appeared on their faces. It was meaningful and cruel. That should be the case. 200 years of not seeing him. His cultivation is becoming more and more hard to predict. Qingming nodded slightly, her eyes shining. Is it really appropriate to work with the demon sect? How can it be considered working together? We are just fighting our own battles. Zigue shook his head disapprovingly. Then he was slightly curious. The number 1 demon king in the sword path, the number 1 in the talisman path 300 years ago, and this former number 3 in the demon path. I wonder which of the 3 of you is stronger? Will that Zhongshou be able to deal with us? How can Qingming compare herself to him? Qingming broke into a laugh and mocked herself. When I was in the cloud world, I wasn't as famous as him. Qingming knew that she was far from being able to suppress all heroes and be unrivaled in this world. 40% of spirit and martial arts as one was something Qingming was unable to achieve. He could only rely on his 300 years of bitter cultivation and tempering in the outer realms. However, even compared to Zhongshou, who was more than 300 years older, he still did not have much confidence. This person's strength in Donglin was close to the immortal realm. However, you and I are restricted by the cloud world and can't use it. That's why you and I need to come back. If it was other senior brothers and junior brothers, they wouldn't be able to go up against him. Actually, we don't need to worry too much. Although our Dowling vast habitat didn't use up all the strength of the various sections. However, at this moment, the strength that the cloud world can use is going all out. Just as he said that, the 2 of them suddenly looked towards the east, their brows furrowing. Is it the death wave? Exchanging glances with one another, Zigue scoffed coldly. The death gate opening means that the 9 death which in the east is descending. If we can't stop her, blood will spread for 1,000 miles. At this moment, the heaven and earth seal is lacking a corner. The spiritual wave will rise in a few days. The heavens are helping our Taoist faction. Following this, he had an idea. In the distance, countless armored soldiers were surging over like a tide. Dozens of relatively strong spiritual senses passed through this place one after another. So there are still people in this world who know about me. Laughing out loud, Zigue took a step and disappeared from the spot. Qingming shook his head slightly. At the start he felt that it was best not to use his real name. Forget it. It might not be a bad thing to alert the enemy. It would be best if they could alert Zhongshou. If they couldn't, it would also be a good idea to make the garrison here suspicious of everything. No matter how smart a person was, as long as they felt danger and pressure, as long as they panicked, they might make mistakes. A sharp glow flashed in his eyes as he followed closely behind Zigue and left the place. When the thousands of soldiers rushed over, the people here were nowhere to be seen. Driving the Royal Demon God Shuttle, Zhongshou used just 3 days to fly above the Demon Corpse Mountain. The Een mist here had already spread outside of Blood Valley, covering thousands of miles. The Een death energy wasn't any weaker. Half of the mountain range was covered by it. Although Zhongshou was prepared and had placed many troops in Cloud Saint City, he couldn't get close at all. Looking below, thinking back to what happened a few years ago, Zhongshou instantly sighed. Not long after he arrived, the original Cloud Saint City Lord, one of the few governors Su Jingyuan also flew over. Half a year ago, this person also broke through to grade 7 and could travel in the air. At this moment, he stood behind Zhong Shou, his face filled with worry. 3 days ago, the in-death energy here suddenly exploded. He had grasped the Styx River Death Sword and experienced death energy that was dozens of times thicker than this. Naturally, he didn't fear the death energy here. Within 1,000 miles of this demon corpse mountain, there were no living beings. Even the grass and trees were all withered. The ground was covered in a thin layer of ice. Around him, there were numerous gazes that were looking over from afar. Looking out, it was all jumping in flames. Although there were no living beings, there were many dead things that could move. Most of them were decomposing beast corpses, and some were white and dry bones. However, maybe because the area around Demon Corpse Mountain had no birds or beasts, Zhong Shou was also prepared and locked down this place. These dead things were all really low-grade and didn't pose a threat to him. Until Zhong Shou walked in front of the tombstone, there wasn't a single dead thing that dared to provoke him. These death beasts mostly didn't have any intelligence. However, they could judge the strength and weakness. Just based on the strong sword suppression that Zhong Shou spread out, it was enough to make them wary. Looking at the words on the tombstone, Senior Sister Gong Shinran's blood, Zhong Shou was in a daze once more. This was the person he fell in love with in the past. In the past, he thought that he was Tanqiu. Although he pitied Gong Shinran's fate, he didn't feel much about this girl. However, at this moment, he already knew his true identity. The so-called Tanqiu was just Zhong Weiran gathering his soul and using the power of the Book of Ian to enter another Zhong Shou 10,000 years later. Thinking back to the various things that happened in Linhai College, Zhong Shou's eyes were filled with melancholy. Then, he came back to his senses. Even if Gong Shinran could wake up, she wouldn't be that gentle and caring senior sister who took care of him. Zhong Shou wasn't that young teen anymore. His heart realm definitely wouldn't return to a few years ago. Sighing, Zhong Shou injected spiritual energy into his eyes and looked into the tomb. However, he couldn't see Gong Shinran's body. He could only see a ball of Yin mist within the tomb. Just as Zhong Shou's spiritual sense was about to pierce through the Yin mist. Inside the stone tomb, there was an extremely cold divine sense that pierced into the depths of his Yuan soul like an awl. Zhong Shou's brow rose up and he retracted his gaze. He also blocked out this spiritual sense. Then, he stood on the spot and kept silent. That spiritual sense just now was Gong Shinran? It was ice-cold, filled with violence, not like a living person, it was indeed a dead person. Chapter 695. After keeping silent for a long while, Zhong Shou looked around the stone tomb. There should have been many talisman seals around, but at this moment they were all broken. The Yin death power was wave after wave as it charged in all directions. Although Zhong Shou didn't feel uncomfortable, he could feel that this death power was being controlled by a power. It charged towards where he was standing. Numerous evil spirits were hidden within. Oh! With a cold scoff, the death power around Zhong Shou's body surged back. As for the evil spirits, he didn't need to attack. The moment it got close, it started to collapse. Looking at the tomb, Zhong Shou found it hard to understand what was going on. Killing intent rose up in his chest, flickering. Suddenly it rose up, suddenly it was forcefully pressed down. In the end, he sighed, turning around and walking out of the Yin mist. With his current cultivation, he could wipe out this tomb with a flick of his finger. It wasn't purely because of old feelings. It was because he sensed that Gong Shinran's tomb was between life and death and was protected by two powers. It was vast and strong, filled with death energy, similar to that of Ao Kuan. He finally knew why Jin Buhui's master and those few Haoshuan sect cultivators were injured and returned. Although Zhong Shou could use the Styx River Death Sword to strike into the netherworld and split the two worlds. However, such a move was really risky and smart people wouldn't do it. The moment he stepped out of the mist, Zhong Shou heard a laugh spread from afar. Ruler came up so quickly. Looking in the direction of the voice, they saw Su Chern standing 10,000 feet away. Beside him were 10 odd people. A few of them were familiar people. On the left of Su Chen was Gong Shinran's brother Gong Yu. Although he couldn't travel in the air, he was a dual cultivator and was at grade 6. Using magical artifacts, he could fly in the air. As for the other person, it was Chun Huai, whom he had met once before in Dragon Gathering Mountain. However, at this moment, what he was most concerned about was the dozen or so silent young men behind these people. He had an aura similar to that of a true martial swordsman. Both of them were brimming with sharpness, but their wills were merged into one. Their movements were also similar. Apart from their different appearances, it was as if they were made from the same mold. 7 of them had a 7-section bamboo embroidered on their right sleeve. They were most likely the Cold Mountain Sect's Earth-ranked Dao soldiers, the Cold Mountain swordsmen. The other 6 people all carried large swords on their backs and had a scholarly air about them. He must be Haoshuan Sect's Haoren Qing Xian. Whereas this Su Chen and Chen Huai were obviously not the people in charge of the Haoshuan and Hanshan sections. There was a cultivator standing in front of each of them. At this moment they all bowed to Zhong Shou. Zhong Shou was 200,000 feet in the air, choosing a quiet place to sit down and meditate. Only after 4 days did he suddenly open his eyes and look down once more. At this moment, Su Chen and the others all woke up. The underworld gate has opened. After coming back to life, he didn't even look in their direction. It was as if he and Gong Yu were strangers. At the next moment, Gong Shinran suddenly raised her head and looked at the sky. Then, are you trying to stop me from descending into the human world? With a casual wave of his hand, the nether chi that filled the sky swept over like a tide. The 4 limbs that encircled Gong Shinran's body formed a set of black armor out of thin air. His entire body soared into the sky. Bijou and Bai Rua kept silent and didn't speak. Only a few breaths later did a bright glow explode out from their eyes. Attack! Along with his voice, 7 cold sword lights charged down from the clouds. Gong Shinran looked expressionlessly and didn't care at all. A black shield suddenly pierced out from the nether gate. It spread out 1,000 feet shield light and sealed the sky, blocking the sword light in the sky. Then, numerous cold energy exploded out from the sword shadow energy. Amidst a series of cracking sounds, the entire mountain below instantly froze. The 6 people behind Bai Rua fell down like meteors. They split into 6 directions, coincidentally surrounding Gong Shinran and the Death Gate in the middle. That huge broadsword suddenly stabbed into the ground. Then, 6 vast sword energy charged up, resonating with one another. Each of them opened a scroll which burned without any wind. Then, their aura became more and more solemn and majestic. It actually swept away the nether energy around. Even the Death Gate was suppressed such that it shrank inwards. It's righteous energy. The moment these words were said, Zhong Shou felt that it wasn't right. This was indeed righteous energy, but it didn't come from the 6 of them. It came from the 6 scrolls that were burning. They were books written by Confucians, leaving righteous energy within. Pretty much at the same time, on the 36 pillars around, 36 suns rose up into the sky. Although it was just the great sun Dharma, it was like a real blazing sun. Numerous true sun flames shone towards the death gate. Gong Shinran frowned slightly, her eyes filled with disgust. However, in the next moment, a person walked out from within the gate. He was dressed in white bone armor, riding on a skeleton dragon horse, holding a 100-foot bone blade. When the beams of golden light shone on him, he casually stabbed the bone knife in his hand into the ground. Immediately, countless black ice mirrors rose from the ground in all directions, firmly blocking the 36 balls of sunlight. It deflected all the true sun flames away. At this moment, within the underworld gate, the owner of the enormous black shield was laughing sinisterly as he walked out from the gate. Cold mountain bamboo swordsmen and righteous Qingxian warriors. TSK, what a huge scene. Since I died, I haven't seen it in a few thousand years. How does your highness want to break out of this tribulation? The one who walked out was 8 feet tall, dressed in a black robe. He was really handsome like a young master, only his face was slightly ashen white. One of his hands was holding onto the giant shield above. His other hand was holding a terrifyingly large hammer. At this moment, the golden light shone. That person squinted and then his gaze turned sharp. This light is really annoying. As the giant hammer smashed out, it grew to over 100,000 feet in midair. It smashed towards the few scripture pillars in the south. Coincidentally, Zifang was in charge here, so he didn't bother to look. A green lotus seed tossed the scripture pillar. Along with the Buddhist chants, a lotus pillar suddenly stretched out from the ground. It also stretched 100,000 feet, many leaves and petals spreading out. When it fully opened, it welcomed the giant hammer. The lotus flower was instantly destroyed. Zifang's body shook and blood seeped out from his mouth. He was obviously injured, but he still sat there without moving. The black-clothed scholar frowned. Then, with a tisk sound, he unwillingly took back the hammer. At this moment, the 7 bamboo cold star formation above was sending down bits of sword energy and cold stars. It continuously pressed down on the giant shield, causing the entire shield body to nearly freeze. However, along with the black shirt scholar forcefully injecting in a ball of death energy, the ice layer covering the shield was smashed into pieces. The entire giant shield also went up 3 feet against the sword light. In the next moment there was a light shout in the air. Shocking cloud destruction. Only to see that in 7 directions, there was a death mist cloud energy. It gathered into the shape of a sword, bringing with it large amounts of ice sand as it slashed down. The shield light that the black shirt scholar raised up was riddled with holes. Even the black-robed scholar's body was injured. However, there was no blood at all from the wound. There was only white flesh. In a flash, he recovered and took a step down. Numerous white bones charged out from the ground. Like a bone wall, it protected the 3 of them within. After blocking the cloud mist sword light, the scholar broke out into a laugh. It's Lingyun Sek's cloud shocking god-destroying sword formation, another set of earth-grade Dao soldiers. If you don't think of a way, Gu Mie and I won't be able to hold on. At that time, don't blame us if we run back into the death gate. The Gu Mie that was mentioned was the cavalry in white armor. When he heard that, a death flame flashed in his eyes. He was obviously a person of few words, saying, "Lianer and I have just entered the world of life. We aren't even 70% strong, please help." He treated his words like gold, just a few short sentences. Gong Shinran still didn't say a word, black energy wrapped around her hand and a giant sickle was slowly forming. Around the death gate, Buddhist light spread out. The great sun demon subduing scripture shone in all directions. After it merged with the righteous energy, it became even more unstoppable. pretty much swept all the death mist clean. Within the death energy, as long as it was a dead thing that could move, it would pretty much be wiped out. At this moment, Bijou and Bai Rua both opened their spell altars in the air. The leader of a sect was indeed extraordinary. One of them could be compared to half a set of Earth-grade Dao soldiers. Casting spells, many 10,000-foot sword energy landed and struck the bone prison. Along with it were a total of 12 giant banners with Confucian scriptures drawn on them. Some of the words were like dragons and snakes, coming from the hands of a calligraphy master. However, most of the words were just really normal. A portion of it was as ugly as scribbles. However, each stroke between the lines was filled with righteous energy. Zhong Shou's expression relaxed slightly. It seemed like he didn't need to attack to be able to seal the death gate. As for the three of them, even if he couldn't kill them, he could chase them back to the netherworld. Gong Yu at the side clenched his fists tightly. His eyes were filled with worry and he couldn't bear it. A struggling expression appeared on his face. Zhong Shoxin knew what he was thinking and sighed. He could only pat his shoulder to console him. The death witch appearing was when she was at her weakest, and also when she had the highest chance of being sealed. Gong Yu's identity was the last resort. Only when he had no other choice would he try it. Even Zhong Shou didn't dare to take the risk. The death mist around had already scattered and the black energy had been compressed to 30,000 feet. However, just as everyone thought that the situation was settled, Zhong Shou suddenly shouted. Gong Shinran raised that giant sickle. Where this body descends is the netherworld death world. The moment she said this, numerous black waves surged out once more. The death energy turned into a physical form. The righteous energy and Buddhist light were unable to fight back at all as they were smashed apart. The 36 scripture pillars in the distance were still okay, but the 6 righteous Qing Xian warriors who were closer could only barely hold on. The broadsword in his hand caused the righteous energy to continue. However, the 6 scriptures that were opened were burning faster and faster. Gong Shinran's sickle slashed down like a waterfall. Where this body passes, the dead won't be able to rest. The 12 long banners were all broken by the black saber light with a wave of its hand. Numerous wounds appeared on Bai Rua's muscles. The spell altar beneath him exploded into pieces. However, he didn't expect that Hans Han Haoxuan would not only come as promised, but also be an expert. Even the cloud-soaring sect had sent out a cloud-shocking sword formation. The situation just now was too good, so good that it made him careless. He didn't expect that these 3 sword formations, 1 great sun demon subduing formation, and 2 spirit realm experts were still unable to suppress Gong Shinran. During these 10,000 years, numerous death witches had appeared in the world, but none of them were as strong as Gong Shinran. He reached out and patted Zifang's body, energy surging in, causing Zifang's expression to become much better. However, he could only reach such a level. His soul-returning spell was obtained from mysterious cloud spirit sect. It was a god-level spell. As long as one's soul didn't dissipate, one would be able to return to life. Unfortunately, his understanding of the life symbol was still very shallow. Using this spell could at most allow these people to recover their life force, allowing them to escape from the death seal and have some ability to protect themselves. Any more and he wouldn't be able to do anything. In that instance, the giant hammer of the black-robed scholar Lianer smashed towards the sky. It caused the cloud mist in the sky to scatter the 7 bamboo cold star formation. Gumie, who was covered in white bones, pulled out his 100-foot bone knife. Just as he was about to slash out, he felt a sword intent wrap around him. The Yin fire in his eyes instantly constricted as he looked forward. He saw a thin person flash from the pillar and appear in front of the 3 of them, standing in front of the death gate. When Gong Shinran saw this, she was stunned. Then, she regained her composure and was in deep thought. I remember you. You are called Zhong Shou. Linhai College, my junior brother. When Lianer heard this, he gave out a teasing laugh. Junior brother? It seems like your highness has met someone you know. How deep is your relationship? Do you want me to show mercy? His lips curling up until they were close to his eyelid. That soul-returning spell is not bad, just a small heaven realm. To dare come here, is he asking to die? This person is just trash. I heard that he has a dual meridian body and can't cultivate. I pitied him, so I occasionally took care of him. Gong Shinran closed her eyes and thought about it. Then, a cold disdain appeared at the corner of her lips. Before I died, I only remembered that his archery flying knife was really amazing and shocking. Who knows how he is now? Oh, I remember that when I was alive, this person had a crush on me for many years. Interesting. Dual meridian body. Lianer wanted to mock, but at this moment, he looked towards Zhong Shou with a weird expression. It was rare for a dual meridian body to enter grade 9. Then, there was more disdain in the depths of his eyes. Chapter 698. Gong Shinran was still thinking about her memories. After a long while she smiled. I remember, you were the one who buried me in this 9-yin land. I have to thank you for that. Thinking about it, this is the grace of a new life, and I have to repay you. Are you willing to die and work for me? Zhong Shou frowned, temporarily not bothering about the unidentified green-robed Taoist. He looked closely at Gong Shinran, only to see that her eyes were really calm, looking down from above without any shine in them. It seemed like she really treated those words as a matter of course. In the next instant, her tone changed once more. Oh, I remember that you are the Monster King's son? Have you succeeded the next master of Gantian Mountain? That's right, I heard people call you ruler, so you must be the master of Gantian Mountain, right? The overlord of Donglin and the Northwest, occupying 3 provinces, over 100 million people. The moment she said this, the yin fire in Gumie's eyes swelled as he looked at Zhong Shou once more. Knife intent surged and locked onto him. Lianer chuckled in a strange manner. So you are the king of a country, sorry for the disrespect. However, this only made things more interesting. This person's identity is really useful to us. I wonder what your highness Nether Maiden thinks. He totally ignored what that person said about him being first in the sword path, invincible in the world. Even if he was invincible, he would be someone a few hundred years from now, so what was there to fear? Gong Shinran was deep in thought. That's true. This person's identity as ruler is really useful. Zhong Shou had already given up hope. When he heard that, he was neither happy nor angry, only sighing to himself. He clenched his fists tightly, energy surging in his body as he was prepared to attack. However, with a thought, he used his spiritual sense to sense that there was an aura descending from the sky behind him. The person was really weak and couldn't take it when the black mist was deep. He was protected by Zhong Shou's true qi and was able to continue descending. His strength was only grade 6, it was Gong Yu. On the other hand, Zhong Shou's eyes flashed with a hint of hesitation. With Gong Shinran's current condition, even if Gong Yu came, it would be useless. Instead, it would only add to the danger. However, he couldn't help but have a glimmer of hope rise in his heart. After all, Zhong Shou was only Gong Shinran's junior brother. Even if they were close when they were alive, there was still a distance between them. However, Gong Yu was her only brother. With just a slight hesitation, Gong Yu had already landed beside him. Her expression was absent-minded at first, and the look in her eyes was complicated and sad. Then, she said with a bit of hope, Sister Ran. Do you still remember you were? You were? Of course I remember. This consort's younger brother was called Gong Yu, right? Gong Shinran looked away and followed the voice with interest. Then, he nodded his head in satisfaction. You've grown up. You're very much like your father. In a short span of 6 years, he had already entered the 6th stage. Not bad. Come to Big Sister's side and let me take a closer look. Gong Yu was delighted when he heard that. He didn't think much about it and walked over. Zhong Shoxin's heart sank once more and he was on guard. Gong Shinran's tone didn't look like she had met her family. There were no fluctuations in her emotions, and her face was expressionless. Both sides were just 1,000 feet apart. Gong Yu took just 10 steps and was not far away from Gong Shinran. However, Gong Shinran raised her hand and pointed at Gong Yu's brow. Gong Yu was instantly shocked. He looked on as the black energy was about to enter his forehead. However, he couldn't move at all. That black dot was filled with death energy. Before it even touched him, it was already sucking away the life force in his body. Just as he was closing his eyes and waiting for death, he felt like someone was pulling him from behind. His body explosively retreated back to Zhong Shou's side. Although he was out of danger, he was still terrified. Then, he looked across in confusion. He knew that if it wasn't for Zhong Shou saving him, he would have definitely died. Didn't Big Sister Ran recognize him? Why did she want to kill him? He remembered that when he was young, the one who loved him the most was his second sister. Before he could ask, Zhong Shou said solemnly, "Why did you do that? He is your only brother." When Gong Shinran heard that, she was a little confused. Her brow furrowed. "Why are you so troublesome? What's wrong with being like me? Only by my side can I take care of him." Liana laughed out loud once more. Her Highness likes her brother, so naturally, she wants him to be like her, to accompany her at all times. What's so weird about that? Unfortunately, although you gave her a new lease of life, you are still a ruler. You are still of some use if you are alive. If not, you would have the honor. In his heart, he was slightly shocked. Just now, this person's saving methods were really amazing. Even he wasn't able to stop him. He did have some skill. Maybe his title as the top sword path wasn't just for show. He turned and looked into the distance, only to see that the 6 vast Xianqing warriors and the 36 Buddhist faction monks were all retreating. He laughed in disdain. "Your Highness, it is best if you don't talk nonsense with this person. If you drag on, these people are going to slip away. There are many spirit realm experts who can be made into een puppet. In the future, they will be of more help." Gong Shinran acknowledged, not bothering about Zhong Shou anymore. She casually waved the black sickle in her right hand. The black energy and death mist swept once more. Dozens of blade shadows formed in mid-air and swept over. He didn't pull out his sword. Zhong Shou directly used his fist as a sword and punched out. The 9 dragons behind him also let out a roar. Fire Dragon Vast Sword, Platinum Dragon Sword. Just 2 types of true dragon sword intent. However, the martial path he used this time wasn't stacking, but 1. The true attainments of the 9 true dragons. Instantly flying through the air, he attacked later but arrived first. When the fist and blade clashed, it was like a fire dragon was wrapping around Zhong Shou's arm, roaring out. It caused the ice power to collapse in one strike. The blade light scattered. The dragon bone cavalry under Gumia actually couldn't take it. His 4 limbs were smashed into pieces. Lianer was totally stunned at the side. How did Gumia actually lose? He seemed to have seen this fist technique before. However, at that time, it didn't have such strength. When the blade aura charged over, Gong Yu's face turned ashen white. This was the first time he saw a spirit realm expert attack at such a close distance. Just the saber intent alone was enough to crush him. He originally thought that he would most probably die, but then he saw that this cold and domineering blade was broken by Zhong Shou with just one fist. His body was thin and weak, like he couldn't even stand up to the wind. However, looking at him now, he was like a mountain. Just as he felt at ease, he heard Zhong Shou's voice. "I am sorry." Sorry? Why did he have to apologize and say sorry? In the next moment, he understood what Zhong Shou meant. Gong Yu's lips were filled with bitterness. He wasn't willing, but he knew that Zhong Shou had tried his best. This was the best method. He also knew that he had no strength to stop it. Opposite him, the yin flame in Gu Mie's eyes was filled with disbelief. This saber strike was actually defeated, and it was a clean defeat. What a strong fist. No, it was a sword. This person used his fist to replace the sword and had reached the peak of sword soul. However, how could a grade 9 have such strong fist strength? Even if he used soul-level sword intent to gather true chi, it shouldn't be like this. Also, the King Path aura was so strong that it made one terrified. Suddenly, Gu Mie's pupils constricted and a spiritual light flashed. Spirit and martial arts merger. You are 40% spirit and martial arts merger. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.